It is now 8:30 a.m. My name is Rosie Pryor. I'm the current chair of the Lane Community College Board of Education, and I am calling this meeting to order. Tammy, if you are nearby, can you please call the roll?
Holly Johnson,
Present.
Angela Van Kraus, Mike Eister,
Here.
Austin Fulneggy,
Here.
Steve Mattel,
Here.
Rosie Pryor,
Here.
Lisa Fragala.
Here.
Our first order of business is a land recognition, and I'm calling on Dr. Stephanie Bolger to read that.
Yes. We begin our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya.
Angela, incredibly timely. Welcome. Glad you're here. I can see your picture, but I'm not sure it's moving. So do we have
Looks like she's connecting. She'll be
video?
on.
Why don't we take a moment and reverse our agenda and address the board calendar that was included in our packet. Is there an expectation that we approve this board calendar? Is that why it's in the packet again?
Yes, that's why it's in the packet.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a suggestion. Since the board has a desire to talk about the logistics of its meetings, but we will likely not get to that today. I'm looking at the agenda that was revised for us. Which could impact how frequently we retreat or whether we meet twice a month or so forth and so on. If there's no pressing urgency to adopting this calendar, perhaps we could table this until the fall, until such time as the board has had the opportunity to talk about its practices for meeting and how it wants to approach that.
Rosie, are we going to use the raise hand feature or should I use my real hand?
Why don't you use your real hand if you wish? If you want to be heard,
Yes, thank
please
you.
go ahead.
I'd like to move that we adopt the calendar. We can always change it, but we don't meet in August, which moves that we will be means we will be moving forward without a plan in place.
Yeah.
And I would like to at least see us have a plan that we can modify rather than leaving the president without an approach for the coming month when we're all not meeting in August.
Thank you, Lisa. Austin?
I just wanted to second that. You made a motion. I want to second that motion.
Thank you. Do you want to speak to your motion, Lisa, or are you content?
I believe I did.
Okay.
You're not being in order with that.
Okay. Is anyone else want to be heard?
I don't have strong feelings. I can go either way. So yeah.
I don't have strong feelings either, to be honest with you. Just trying to make things convenient for the board. Tammy, will you call the roll, please?
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus. Nope.
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Austin Fulneggy,
Aye.
Steve Mattel,
I'm gonna abstain. I haven't read it.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
and Lisa Fragala.
Aye.
The motion carries. So we'll move next to the election of a vice chair. Is there anyone who would like to make a nomination?
I move that Steve Mattel be the vice chair of our board.
Is there a second?
Mm.
Angela, did you speak?
Yeah,
Yeah.
second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to elect Steve Mattel as vice chair of the board. Mike, do you want to speak to your motion?
Steve is a highly experienced board member, not only here, but has a lot of experience that he's brought with him. Chairing the eWeb board, he has, I don't think I need to say anymore. I think people know why I nominated Steve, so I'll just leave it at that.
Is there anyone else who would like to be heard? Austin.
Hi there. First off, I really want to appreciate the discussion we had last time as a board and together and so forth. I just want to ask those who support me for vice chair to ask if you could support Steve in his role as vice chair. I will be voting for Steve in this for vice chair, and I ask for my supporters to also vote for Steve. I do this both as a sign of both unity, respect, and that I want us to move forward with unity. And yeah, I look forward to working with both Rosie and Steve.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else wish to be heard? Tammy, will you call the roll?
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Cross,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Austin Fullnagy,
Aye.
Steve Mattel,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Steve. I look forward to working with you. Thank you, Austin, for your approach to board unity. I really appreciate and value that. I look
Thank
forward
you,
to
everybody.
working with you as
Appreciate it.
well. Okay, I believe as I look at our agenda that concludes our business meeting, and we can now turn to the business of our retreat and welcome our facilitator, Dr. Cindy Miles. Before we begin, Dr. Bulger, is there any comment you wish to make as we get started?
Just that Dr. Miles comes highly respected in the world of community colleges. She's been a president of community college. She's also been a chancellor of a community college district in California. She has a great deal of experience, a breadth of experience, and she has been just formerly the head of the accrediting commission for community and junior colleges in California. So she is an exceptional leader, an exceptional colleague, and very, very pleased she's going to be leading or facilitating this board retreat today.
Thank you so much, President Bulger. And I just want to say hello to all of you and express my gratitude for this opportunity and for the trust that you've placed in me to hold space for you to do your good work, because this is really your work that you're doing. I have to be really honest, though. I am wildly bummed that we're not together face to face. So that's just out there, and I'm going to be real about it because I was really looking forward to it. And I think you all were too. You know, certainly what I heard from you and when we had the chance. And I need to add a thanks because for the time that each of you have already contributed to our time with this retreat, because every single one of you set aside, at least an hour for a one-on-one with me where I had a chance to get to know you, hear what you thought was working well with Lane and areas for improvement, where, some of your background, your hearts and minds. And so that really helps me get a little bit more sense of what we're weaving together to, for you to collectively build a collective future for the organization. So that's my big thanks. And maybe we'll have a chance face to face, before too long. That's my hope. I like to start with looking at where we're going. As we've modified this a couple of times, we're looking at a half day. I think everyone knows that. And here we are in the virtual format. And we just know, you can't do the same things like this, and you certainly can't sit on Zoom all day long because we wouldn't have the chance to have our walkabouts, our breakout sessions, those breaks, those breathers. So we've distilled, based on what I heard from President Bulger as she was wanting to achieve, and then what I heard from each of you, we crafted the longer agenda. Then we've gone back and had to distill it to this half-day format. And I want to take a look at it with you first And Tammy, I don't know if do you have the document to pull up, or you can give me share screen and I can pull it, whichever you prefer.
Okay, one moment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I always like to know where I'm going before I begin. So we calibrate on that and make sure we don't want to make changes in it. And my expectation right now is I want to clarify our outcomes for the day and make sure that meets your expectations. So that's where my head's going right now.
If any of you are logged into board docs, the revised agenda is in your board docs.
Thanks, Rosie. I know we were making those changes even yesterday, midday, I think, Stephanie.
It's coming. I have a couple on here. It'll be just a moment.
I know when I'm trying to do that, I always have 47 documents open and I'm scrolling through them trying to find it. Oh my gosh. So as it's coming up, think about what are the key things you want to walk out of here at noon and make sure we do. All right. Thank you. So we left the purpose as it was stated. I amended the outcomes a little bit. And I wonder if I might implore, lean on, one by one, if you would take turns. Let's put voices in the room and read the outcomes. Could I have a volunteer to read the first one?
Sure, I'll read it.
Thank you.
The first outcome is a renewed sense of shared community and purpose for LCC Board of Education members.
Thank you, Rosie. Number two.
I'll do the second one. Initial strategic agenda for Elaine Community College to lead in rapidly changing higher education environment.
Thank you.
Number
Goals
3.
for the board to collectively to advance their strategic agenda for LCC.
Thanks.
Number 4, mutual expectations for the board and CEO to promote positive, generative board CEO relations and LCC success.
Thank you. Number 5.
Number 5, process for board members to hold themselves and their CEO accountable for meeting expectations.
Thank you. And finally,
Well, I'll do it just to keep things moving. Process for sustaining the momentum of progress toward achieving the board strategic agenda for LCC.
thank you. When I looked back at these again last night and this morning, I think they are perhaps a little ambitious.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I also think that they're like a moving forward type of thing. A person who's plowing a field, they don't look backwards, because otherwise they'll mess up what they're plowing, right? So
Yeah.
we've plowed through a lot of interesting things the last several years, and board members here who went through the pandemic as well. There's a lot of earth that we've had to till through, and now we're moving forward. Now there's more field to plow through. There's more mountains to get through. So yeah, I really like the kind of forward thinking and forward outlook of this.
Thank you, Austin. And what I hear you saying in that also is you're not starting from scratch. You have done some of this work, and obviously, and I heard it from you as we discussed it, and look at your documents, look at what you've done over the past couple of years together, and you have a new CEO you want to join hands and arms with to keep a strategic agenda going. The way I'm seeing this big picture is maybe a little bit of a reset. I'm just going to, use my language because I want to calibrate with you and make sure you're seeing it the same way. I see the opportunity today as a little bit of a recalibration reset on your big picture strategic agenda in the context of the the ideas and the book that we shared with you that are really kind of holding space for big picture changes in higher ed. So that calibration on really big picture strategic agenda. And then a secondary piece, and that in some way should inform what you're doing with your strategic plan, with your strategic goals. But then a secondary large component is your relations with your new president. What are your expectations for your new president? Can you get to some focused clarity around those, set some very specific goals and expectations? How are we going to monitor it? What does it mean? All those sorts of things. And expectations for your behavior, as well as the behavior activities, as well as those for the president, for the relationship, the CEO board relations that you're forging and building going forward. And then kind of closing with this sense of how are we going to maintain progress? Lisa, I see your hand and it tells me I can't see everybody at one time. So maybe if we take the agenda down, Tammy, so we can maybe see faces. Thanks. Everybody has the agenda in your hand or on your screen, right? You can get back to it. Super. Okay. Lisa, what you got?
You're
You're muted.
Getting the, okay, great. I really appreciate the framing as a reset that you provided. And in addition to the setting expectations, so a reset is important, but we do have a new president. And so I agree the setting expectations and the relationship is critical, but I'd also like to make sure that we include in that we are providing the president the support she needs to be successful. Because I really believe that great institutions thrive when the leadership is well supported. And that doesn't mean we lose our authority as a board, but that we understand the need to support our new leadership.
I really appreciate you articulating that. And if you look down at kind of the sub bullets under the work with new CEO section, had goals and expectations, and then the mutual expectations. And then you're right, I did not mention that critical piece. Thank you, Lisa, supporting the CEO's success. Thanks. And I think, Rosie, did I see your hand?
I was just going to point to those bullets underneath work with the new CEO. It says mutual expectations for board CEO relations. So I was assuming we would do what Lisa's asking.
Good. Yeah, but I really think it's important to say it aloud. So I appreciate that. So are there any concerns about or changes or questions that you have about these outcomes that we've set? Observations? Yes, Mike.
I'd just like to say that I didn't read the whole book, but I did read the last chapter a couple of times, and I really appreciate it. It was insightful to me. And I don't know that I would have agreed with the concept of reset, even though we do have a new president, had I not read that last chapter. To me, it's clear that we need to think in terms of reset.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you, Mike. And we'll have a bit of time to dig in and share some concepts out of there. So thank you. Okay, if we can only do one or two things today, what's most important? Rosie.
What's most important to me is that we make a really positive, successful transition for our new president. There are pieces and parts that our new president has to put in place yet. I want to provide the support needed for that to happen. We've lost some of our bench strength in the last couple of months in terms of the finance operation and the research operation at the college, which I had really come to value. And I want to support the president to be able to replace those. I want to understand better how she sees the future of Lane. And I want to hear from my colleagues on the board about how they see the future of Lane, so we understand where we're all coming from and what target we may be shooting for collectively. That's what I would like to accomplish today.
Thank you, Rosie. And I will share that as I spoke with each of you, I would say that the two big goals that I heard you all say, if I were going to kind of do cross-cutting themes, were building your relationship as a board. That you can say that lots of ways, but coming together, having a chance to know one another, deepen that, building your trust, building your cohesion. I heard that as a primary goal. It's going to be hard to do in Zoom today, in my opinion. We can make progress. Here we are, we're doing this right now. But then a second thing I heard as the high priority is exactly what Rosie was articulating, making sure we get the good start with our new president collectively. So I would typically want to put that, up at the number one. But the reason the agenda is structured the way it is, and in all transparency, worked with Stephanie and of course Rosie and Lisa on this, is I think we need to lay context before we get there. But I think it's important that I help drive us to make sure we spend as much time as we can on the work with the new CEO piece of this. Okay. Angela, can I ask a logistics question? How long are you going to be with us? Will you be able to stay? Because I know you had a competing priority, Angela.
Oh, I was going to have to depart at noon. So
At noon. Oh, good. All right. Fantastic. So we've got a whole team for the noon hour. Let's jump in. I want to start with a moment of what we do with getting acquainted. And I'm going to pitch a question to you. And I would like for each of you to share with your colleagues. So reflect back. We're an education institution. You're looking at this book about transformation of education, what's going on in higher ed. But we know there's a lot of fundamentals that have always been there. Think back in your own educational experience. And this can go all the way back to kindergarten, anywhere along your pathway. And think of a teacher or someone in that teaching role who made a significant impact on you. And if you would share with us that story. You ready, Holly?
Yeah. I had Mrs. Gregory in fourth grade. And number one, she was African American. And so I was able to identify with her. And number two, she taught me how to write a book report. And I was so excited. It was the first time I had learned of Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. I think maybe both. Anyway, and I had and I think I chose one of them to write the report. But anyway, she taught me structure and how to lay out that book report and how to come up with a theme and the body of the paragraph, and to eventually put it together and work it into a working document that had lots of structure. So I really remember Miss Gregory, my fourth grade teacher, and it provided for me throughout my education how to use different components and put them in place and create a document that was fluid.
It sounds like one skills you've used many times over, but also gave you a beautiful role model.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Mike, do I see your?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wish I had been a second grader a couple of years ago, so Lisa Fragola could have been my teacher. I really don't know anybody who's as organized and thoughtful about their approach to education as I have come to learn that Lisa is. Like all of us, I can think of multiple teachers who had a powerful impact on me. I have a great love for classical music that I wouldn't even understand had it not been for Jack Bordess, who taught me music through multiple years of elementary school. But if I had to identify a particular teacher, it'd be Joan Henry, my third grade teacher, also back in those early years, Holly, who just took an interest in me. I could tell that she wanted me to succeed. I felt like she was invested in my success. And I remember one piece of advice she gave me, which was to try to get good at one thing, at least one thing. And I'm not sure I've accomplished that, but it was good advice.
It's lovely. It's lovely, Mike. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. And then I'll go to Lisa.
Well, I'll jump in. Thanks. Good question. It's always fun to reflect on people who've had a, big impact on our lives. So for me, I'll choose Peter Gorelnik. He was the director of a camp, a summer sleepaway camp that I worked at from the time that I was 16 as a CIT up till about 22. So whatever that is, 7 or 8 summers. So I respected him because for a number of reasons. He was a great speaker and a really great writer, excuse me. And he always put sort of values forefront and center in whatever big decisions he was sharing with all of the staff. So I had a lot of respect for him. That was sort of the foundation. And he, like Mike said, sort of similar for me. It was clear to me at a certain point that he took a real interest in me and supported me and promoted me. It was less about academic things like the kind of teaching me how to do an academic type of a thing. It wasn't that kind of a setting. It was all character development. He would say, and he would be very forthright with me. He would say, well, Steve, you're doing a good job, but here's some things that I think you might want to work on. And because I had so much respect for him, and because I believe that he had my best intentions at heart, I listened and I grew from it, and I still do.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. Lisa?
Sure, thank you. And thanks, Mike, for that recognition. The 2 educators that had a profound impact on my life actually inspired me to become an educator. And it was Mr. R and Ms. Carlson, and they really worked as a team. I was a little bit of a wild child in high school, and also
hard to believe.
was the first person in my family to ever pursue a college degree. And they both went after me. They saw my potential and they advocated for me, and I never would have gone to college if they hadn't done that. But Mr. R also took me on a trip to Europe to participate in an international peace activist event. Nuclear disarmament was still a movement at that time. I'm dating myself. And so he actually engaged me as an activist. And so I think that the link between being an educator and advocacy was always very strong for me, and they both had a profound impact on my life. I think that it has also impacted the way that I see education as a path towards lifting up historically marginalized communities.
Thank you, Lisa. It's fun to see where those long ago seeds grow. Thank you, Austin.
Yeah. I had the honor to attend the employee appreciation event recently. It was amazing and humbling at the same time, because there's been people that have worked at this institution for longer than I've been alive, for like 40 years, 30 years. And it's really incredible to see that in our staff. And someone who actually had a little bit of an impact on me recently, Donna, who is our most recent executive assistant, Me and her had a conversation, and she taught me a lot about like kind of things that happened in the past with the board and so forth. And something that was a really amazing takeaway was that no matter what happens, as long as we're doing the good work and no one's bleeding and nothing's, it can be fixed. We can do this. It'll be okay. And yeah, I really appreciated that because there's a lot of experience that she has with the board, and she's seen a lot with the dynamics of this board. And it's something that I've always I've been bringing with me to these meetings recently, that no matter what happens, it will be okay. We can fix this. We can. The things we face are surmountable. I know we're talking about educators, but sometimes it's not just the teachers that teach us lessons in our lives.
Austin, thank you. I guess we'll let you get away with that. I don't know. We take a vote. He didn't tell us a story. We're gonna let him get away with that. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I thought I told a story. I'm sorry.
No, I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you because I was teasing you about not telling one specific story. But thank you for letting me tease you a little bit. You'll get to know me. I'm a bad girl, Austin. I appreciate you.
I think that leaves me.
Yay.
Culture. So I think my story is one that many folks on the board have already heard. I have other teachers that I've thought of from my younger days, but not as many as you might think, given that I was homeschooled for some period of time. I went to LCC as a non-traditional student in my mid-20s, and I had, I think you could call it math and I don't know if it would be math anxiety exactly, but I came in thinking that I was just terrible at math, that I couldn't do it, that I just didn't have the brain for it, I just wasn't smart enough. And I had to take some math classes in order to transfer credits. So I came to LCC and I started taking math. And I took math with Dale Green, and he told us very early in the class, I think it was Math 95, that it's just a matter of bookkeeping and following the rules. Like, keep track of everything from the problem, keep track of it all the way through, and follow the rules. And suddenly math was not just accessible, but like kind of fun. Like, I turned out to be really good at following rules and keeping track of things. And so getting a math degree, and in the process, I met my husband in the math department in the library at UO. So, and now I'm an analyst. So it completely changed just the entire course of my life, personally, professionally. I can't think of anything more impactful.
Thank you. Thank you. Rosie.
I'm happy to share, but I hope Dr. Bulger will share too.
Oh, I'm not going to let her off the hook. Don't worry.
Oh, good. Well, anytime anybody ever asks me about a teacher who made a difference in my life, it's always my high school freshman English teacher, Mrs. Knox. And she told me if she'd ever had a daughter, her daughter's name would be Rosemary. And just like everybody else who talked about a teacher who took an interest in them, that's pretty much, I think, why I think about Mrs. Knox. And she just made me feel like she could see me, and that I was bright and capable and worthy, and made a lifelong difference in my life.
That is a theme I'm hearing, Rosie, and I have before. Someone who sees you, you feel seen. And I know in my case, it was people who saw more in me than I saw in myself. I remember, Dr. Love walking across the parking lot at night when I was finishing my master's degree and driving 45 miles to go to grad school, and got a kid and trying to start a new job and trying to figure out how to meet all the exams. And I had a GRE and I didn't even know what it meant. and he's walking with me to class, and he said, "Did you ever think about going into administration? We need more women in administration." Like, I can't even, I'm just trying to get through today. But someone who sees more in you than you see in yourself is often a theme. Stephanie, you're up.
Yeah, and that's really my story too, because I've heard all the stories about when we were children and the people who impacted our lives at that point. And certainly I have stories like that. But the story I want to tell is really about a mentor being a teacher too, because mentors, I think, are teachers as well. And so it was really my first experience in community colleges. Now, I left graduate school greener than green. I had no idea what it meant to be a community college administrator. Thank goodness that was 20 years ago. So I came into an institution, and I really believe that the person who's the chancellor saw something in me that he wanted to develop, and I had the energy and the eagerness and all of that, but the undeveloped talent. And I think that's much of what we do in community colleges too. We see students and we develop the talent that's inside of them. So he would ask me what it was that I wanted to do, and also would give me things. He would offer me things. I'd say, "Oh yes, I'll do that." And it turned out that I started doing so many things based on that. And so my portfolio grew. I started moving up in the institution. And so it really just strikes me as really what Cindy said about someone seeing something in you and then developing that. So I learned so much from him. It was really the foundation for how I think about community colleges, serving the community, but also how to manage the political landscape of community colleges, which is critically important. So his name is Dr. Ivory, and he's still there at that institution after about 25 years. So longevity makes a difference. So he taught me that too, is how to have longevity in an institution. So that's what I would share.
And thank you. And Dr. Ivory has touched so many lives. He's still at it. He's wonderful. And I saw a message pop up with an invitation to curiosity about Tammy. If you wanted to share your story, are you comfortable with our putting you on the spot? And I want to give you the allowance to say no. I can hassle Austin, but I'm not going to hassle you.
No, thank you.
All right, love.
I do have one, but no, thank you. I won't waste your time. You're good.
It's absolutely not a waste.
No, you go.
All right. We'll get you when we're face to face for sure.
Okay.
So thank you all, because I do think we, learn more about one another and see our commonalities. And this is where it's also, valuing this work. People who work in community colleges, people who serve on community college boards, these aren't jobs. These are acts of service. They're commitments of care. And I certainly know that's true as I spoke with all of you. And, there may be ups and downs and differences, but I think that we share the bigger values and what it's all about. So thank you. Thank you. All right, taking a breath, moving agenda. I have to push us a little more uncomfortably than I might. I want to shift our focus to a discussion about, we call this little section, Look Out, Look In, and this changing context for higher ed. And you were all given the book, the Art Levine and Scott Van Pelt. And I'd like to just start, we said, skim it, but at least read the final chapter 16, etc. I'd like to just hear back general reactions. Start with general reactions to the concepts. And I think, Mike, you had alluded to it earlier. You made a comment. Maybe we call that back as to warm our conversation. Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Most of you know that I spent my entire career as an administrator in higher ed. And it's interesting that some of you talked about people who had an influence on you that didn't have the formal title of teacher. I have put educator on my tax form as my occupation for my entire career. even though I was an administrator in higher ed. Reading the book caused me to think about how I had done what the book says you shouldn't do. And that is to just kind of assume that things are just going to continue to evolve and move along as they have. And as I read the book, it does seem to me that we're at kind of an inflection point, not only in higher education, but across the board in our country, in our world. COVID has taught us a lot of things, and it's not going to be the same. Whatever we evolve from COVID is going to be different, and there will be some things that will be better. But the main message I got from the book is that we have to be deliberate about shaping that future, rather than just allowing it to evolve. And so I'm really interested in exploring with my board colleagues your ideas about how we shape that future so it's not just an accident, but it's intentional.
Thank you, Mike. Angela. And then Austin.
I have to pause the treadmill here because it's kind of noisy.
Thank you. Otherwise, we're going like this to listen to you.
I'm sorry, if it's distracting, I can stop.
No, I'm just teasing you. It's perfectly fine and healthy.
You're very welcome to tease me. I can take it. I have 3 brothers. So,
Good. Yeah, I come from a family of teasers. So, but if I'm in a, if I'm pushing a boundary, I need you to tell me. So.
Thank you. I feel like I've been thinking about my work as fundamentally changed. The world has changed. My company is trying to force everybody back into this office that they spent a ton of money on. And I've learned that I like working right here with a treadmill. Like I can type at about 1.3 miles per hour. It's great. I don't to go into an office anymore. But I haven't really translated that. I think where was it? I have highlighted this section, but I think I've lost it. But the book talks at one point about how institutions who are overly invested in their physical, for some, 233, for some institutions, having a costly physical campus could become a liability if students come only to attend classes. And this really sort of struck me, especially in the context of our recent bond. We're spending a ton of money on a beautiful campus. And I think that it's important and I think that it's valuable, but I think we also need to maybe consider tempering something of our expectations of our students, and make sure that revisit our facilities master plan and make sure that the facilities that we're building are in fact the facilities that our students want, and we're not overbuilding and overspending on things that, we're going to try to force people to use that they don't want to use. And I'm not thinking about that in terms of any specific project on the docket right now, but just sort of in general.
Yes.
In the context of my experience at work. And so I found that really interesting. But I also wanted to do just a quick call out to the Kalamazoo, Michigan Promise reference, because I grew up in Plainwell, Michigan. I graduated high school in 2003, which was 2 years too early to move to Kalamazoo and get that promise. And I've been bitter about it ever since.
Darn it. Well, we have to then make it available for everyone going forward. Yeah. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. And I will say I'm in conversations with CEOs all over the country, and frankly in Canada. I'm part of a global leadership network, and in Belfast, who are having exactly the same conversations vis-a-vis facilities. And the struggle is, we don't want to swing too hard the pendulum one way or the other. There's probably an and in here, but we're in this messy middle and we don't know. And so there's discussions about can we lease our properties? This gives us a chance. Instead of expanding, we can rent over here. Those buildings are vacant, et cetera, et cetera. So it's changing, definitely changing the conversations. Thank you. Austin.
Yeah. Overall, what I liked about I guess like I came into this position knowing that there was going to be a post-COVID world and that we would have to deal with as an institution. So, and I really appreciated the kind of the history, just the dynamics of the book and different ideas that it presents as possible solutions. Just-in-time programs and educations is something that I'm really fascinated about. And in regards to what we were just talking about with facilities, having our facilities reflect that we can be able to hold just-in-time learning. And because as we build more and more relationships with businesses in our community and so forth, manufacturers in our community, employers who they are creating jobs that did not exist yesterday. And they need to train the labor force in order to fill those positions. Essentially shaping our facilities to be able to do that. I'm really excited about what's happening with Building 12 in that regard. This is those are some main concepts that I really appreciated about it, as well as accounting constructs that we could pursue that are more learning based and so forth. So those are main takeaways from this book.
Thank you, Austin. Would you mind explaining the Building 12 reference for me?
Oh yeah. So we at manufacturing is out of So we're shaping it so that the space is very pliable, meaning that we can. So we could have like healthcare individuals working on training in healthcare fields and stuff like that, but then we could switch it over to advanced manufacturing if we wanted to. So the space is pliable. It's going to become more pliable based off of the plans that have been presented to the board. So.
Thank you. Thanks for that explanation. And I also was struck by Levine has always been prescient, read his work for years, and he's always been skated ahead of the puck and led us in our thinking. But this idea of just-in-time education versus just-in-case education, which is, and of course, he's speaking principally from the university model. He gives us all the history. Community colleges have always prided ourselves or fooled ourselves, I'm not sure which sometimes, on being facile and just in time. I'm not sure we've quite lived up to that, but that's a real interesting distinction, because he's saying, just in case education is going to fall by the wayside. And then the piece you underscored about the accounting system, which is about, time and inputs versus outcomes, and all the different ways of measuring outcomes is a whole different accounting system. And as someone who's just stepped out of the world in accreditation, where it's our responsibility to signify the quality of an institution, but the metrics we've all classically used, and frankly, what we're driven by the Department of Ed as well, are old school accountability metrics, based on accounting systems, based on old accounting systems of time and clock hours and Carnegie units and those sorts of things. So a big conversation is happening across the nation around this.
And also the world of Google and Alibaba and so forth.
Precisely.
Really short-term certifications.
Exactly.
Yeah. That leads right into jobs too. So yeah.
Precisely. And offered by entities that don't have any word of college or university in their titles. Precisely. Thank you. Steve.
I also enjoyed the themes, coming out of the book. So thank you for recommending it and asking us to review it.
It's your brilliant president who did. I need you to know that.
Thanks, Stephanie.
It's your brilliant president.
I didn't know that. Thanks for pointing that out. It's very well done and very timely for us. I'll just make a couple of comments that stood out for me. I too really like that differentiation between just in case and just in time. But as you said, Cindy, I did find that community colleges are already heavily leaning into the just in time, and so I think we're on the right side of that. So I'm sort of glad to hear that. There was a lot of themes for me that echo things that I have heard from fellow board members, as well as leadership on the staff side at LCC. So in the last year or so, leading off really the things that I hear Rosie say is that, hey, we have an enrollment problem, and it's not just tied to the pandemic. We're not quite sure why our enrollment has declined by 40%. We know what some of the drivers are, but we don't know what they all are. And Rosie has alluded to the fact that there's competition out there that we're not fully aware of, and the book really underscores that. And that will continue, and we had better become more clear about how to differentiate ourselves from that competition. And the book has some things to say about that, and I think LCC is positioned to take advantage of that. So how do you differentiate yourself from distance learning? And there was I also watched, by the way, an online video featuring one of the authors, and he was making a joke about sitting in the back of a large lecture hall, and where there's just a talking head up there, and he's saying this is also distance education. It was very interesting to say that. Anyways, how do you differentiate yourself from online education? That's a really important thing for us to keep front and center. And it's that specialized attention. It's that hands-on learning. Those are the reasons why people, would choose to drive as far as on a daily basis to get that hands-on learning, which you just can't get. So some of our most popular programs, the ones that remain popular, are things like welding, things like nursing. You cannot translate 100% of those courses into an online environment. So I found that really interesting. The competition theme I found really interesting. That the fact that we're not going back to 2019, we have to think forward, I found really interesting. I'm reminded frequently by things that Paul tried to move us towards certificates, not degrees, right? That gets to the just in time versus the just in case approach, and also gets to the what I thought was the two main themes were this, that we are moving to a student centric model where they have the power because they have the choice, and we had better pay attention to what it is that they want, and that outcomes versus inputs was also very interesting. So yeah, it definitely gets me my big concern coming out of the last year is the 40% enrollment decline, and trying to think very clearly about why, first and foremost, and then designing accordingly, not necessarily to recover from a 40% drop. We might just have to recognize we're not going to, but what are we going to do about it? For me, is the more important question. Not that we get back to the full size, but that we right size whatever that turns out to be.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I heard Dr. Levine speak to all the CEOs of the accrediting commissions a few months ago. So we had this intimate conversation with him. And he said, one of the biggest messages he's had to convey again and again is there's no going back. And the point that he makes that these changes were already at play. COVID, the pandemic, accelerated the change. Didn't cause it, but has accelerated them. So I thought that was very interesting. Thank you. Rosie.
Just a few days ago, I had blood work done, and the young woman who stuck the needle in my arm, I didn't feel a thing. I was so impressed. I said to her, "Where'd you do your training?" Expecting to hear her say Lane Community College. She said, "Oregon Medical Training." Oregon Medical Training is a private, for-profit, locally based company in Springfield, also in Bend, Oregon, and they teach phlebotomy. Mm-hmm. And so it reminds me, as I answer this question about what in the book struck me, the whole conversation about competency based versus the traditional time-based measuring. Mm-hmm. Reminds me of my dad, the community college president, who when he got his PhD and he went to work for Portland School District number 1, he started a school for them for high school dropouts called Vocational Village. And there were no grades. There were job sheets. Mm-hmm. And each class you took, you learned to do something. Each class, and you had to fill out a job sheet to demonstrate that you had achieved that competency. And if you didn't get the job sheet correct, you just did it again until you got it right, until you achieved that competency. This was 1969.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's a perfect model of CBE. Isn't that amazing? Taking time out of it, formative feedback until you meet the objectives. That's very interesting.
so it was really interesting to me. The other thing that really struck me in the book was the discussion of the whole market of potential community college students who have no interest in traditional college life activities. They don't want to pay the fees for them. They don't want to be, charged for a bus pass they're not going to use. They just want to come and consume what they're after to consume. And those are probably the people who would go to an Oregon medical training as opposed to come to a Lane Community College with all those tacked on additional fees and charges.
Yeah. And the language they're using now is unbundling.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So-
Thank you, Rosie. Angela.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Rosie, I was similarly intrigued by some of the conversation in the book about, demographic shifts and how there are more people physically in the West, but we're not seeing our enrollment shoot up because of all these folks here, which means that, they're getting what they need somewhere else. But I also think, to Steve's point about differentiating ourselves from online education, the book talks about a lot of mergers and partnerships. Like, should we be differentiating ourselves, or should we be partnering? Should we be leveraging the reach of some of these organizations?
Thank you. Good points. Lisa.
Sure. I did have a quick question just out of curiosity. Did we use, and then I'll share my thoughts. Rosie, did we used to have a phlebotomy program here at LCC?
I think once in history, we absolutely did.
Okay. So let's see. I think I mean, I look forward to finishing the rest of the book. I didn't get through as much of it this past week as I
going on. Yeah.
Sometimes I think I can read when I'm not feeling well, but I just couldn't this last week, unfortunately. So one thing that I think Mike's comments about intentionality really made me think about was there are two models that are offered here, adaptive versus disruptive, and those are pretty stark contrasts. And I appreciated that early on in the book, the authors stated their intent that both are possible, right? That they were doing this from a neutral position intentionally. And I was trying to read the book with the lens of, what is our role as a board, what is our role as a board, a functioning group, to the institution, right? And so I think that piece of intentionality and deliberation really spoke to me, that we need to be able to cohesively work as a group, to be intentional, but that it's not one or the other. It could potentially be both. And that we have to be intentional to be able to kind of thread that needle. Because we have a responsibility to this institution in a very significant manner. So I don't know what that means in terms of specific outcomes. I think sometimes it's the natural tendency of the human brain, or maybe for some of us, to go right to specifics and problem solving. And so I was trying to take a step back and think about, what don't I know? What don't I understand? What haven't I considered? And how would we frame this conversation from that perspective? I definitely recognize I don't have all the answers, and I have a lot to learn, and I want to be open. But the other thing that really resonated with me was the stories that we told early on. Education is about relationships. We all told a story about a human being who had an impact on us, that saw us, that saw some capacity in us. And as we think about transforming an institution, I don't want us to lose sight of that, because that is something that is really, I think, integrally connected to our mission to serve historically marginalized communities, and to make sure that the college continues to be a pathway for people to improve their lives. And that there's something about the way that educators have significant relationships with their students. And sometimes those are things you can't measure. Like about a month ago, I was in a meeting, a house party actually, for a political campaign, and a student came up to me who I had in kindergarten. And I didn't recognize this person, but they came up and they hugged me, and then they said how I changed their life as a 5-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
And they remembered me. I don't look the same. They still remembered me. So can we measure that? I don't think we can measure that. So there's some component there about the human element, that I guess as an educator, I hope we don't lose, at the same time that we think about transforming an institution.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. And for your setting up a beautiful segue to, the board's role in this discussion. And your brilliant president has some observations, and I'm going to invite Stephanie to share with you her perspectives on it. But before I go there, I just want to hold 1 second and make sure, Holly, I want to give you an invitation if you would like to put your voice into this before we turn, but no pressure.
No, that's fine. And so I went into it also, into the book, thinking, how can we be a more effective board? How can we grow, as a team? And I thought about, I keep going back to our outcomes on this, the board goals for the college and for the board to collectively and to advance the strategic agenda for LCC. And I, like Lisa, thought about being cohesive, strategizing and being intentional. It's so important in the work that we do. And so, I just started the book from the beginning, and I didn't even make it to the end, but I went into it as, as a board, how can we be more effective, and how is this going to resonate, and help us be a cohesive team, with intentionality, right? In trying to build as a board for the college and for the advancement of a strategic plan. And so that just always keeps popping out at me, and that I hope that we can get there eventually.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Holly. So President Bulger, I'll turn it to you.
Sure. Well, I tell you, the book itself and the chapter in particular had the intended effect, which was to disrupt the thinking, I think, in all of us. It's something that we in higher education have been talking about for years, and certainly coming through the pandemic, we've been talking about doing things very, very differently than before. And to have the board read something like this and to glean the same kinds of impressions that we've had for some time is just really, really quite exciting. So just in terms of a quick synopsis of what I heard from the board is about differentiating ourselves in some way from not just other colleges, but identifying our place and our role as educators. There's something in the book, in that chapter, that said, what business are we in? We're in the business of education. not necessarily the business of credit certificates or degrees or the business of programs, but we're in the business of education. And what does that mean? These are all questions that the institution would need to grapple with and identify what is the specific role for Lane Community College on that. So, and then designing education as a result.
Oh, you popped off. For some reason, mute came on all of a sudden. You might have hit the keyboard. I've done that.
I just saw that. And so I also heard from the board that the context has shifted a bit for everyone on the board with regard to tempering expectations for how decisions are made by the board with respect to, say, facilities and how we think about those kinds of matters. Enrollment, and what does that mean in terms of our enrollment, this changing context that we're in, competency-based versus time-based education. I think the board is certainly on board with thinking about that a little bit. And the whole idea of being an adaptive institution came out of the conversation as well. And so as I've been thinking about Lane Community College, this is the end of my second week, but what's kind of for me is are basically three strategic priorities. And those are, the first one is the fiscal situation of the institution. And the second is enrollment strategy. And the third is institutional culture. And so these are just some kind of bubbling up for me in my taking a look and having conversations with the board, with individuals inside the institution, with reading documents from the self-study and all of the other documents that I've been able to read. It appears to me that before we get to designing education and sort of this new world that we're living in, that there's some fundamentals. There's some fundamentals for Lane Community College to address. And so that's where in fiscal situation, enrollment strategy, and institutional culture come in. But they're nice overarching priorities because as time goes on, then we would be able to see the ability to measure those different priorities in a progressive kind of way. So I'm seeing some fundamentals at the institution that should be addressed. And that would be the foundation to having the institution progress within the context that we see in higher education. I don't know if there are any questions about that, but I would love to engage on that.
I'm with you, by the way. I don't have much to say right here, right now, but I think you're hitting on the stuff that I'm glad to hear you hitting on. I feel that as a board, like Lisa has said some really great things about what happens in the classroom. The board's not in the classroom, right? And appropriately so, right? So, our job is to, create a solid, structure, foundation so that all those fantastic things can continue to happen in the classroom. Things we'll never hear about, those personal relationships, all that's, we can take faith that those things happen. We get glimpses of it at graduation, things like that. But for the most part, we're not, as board members, we're not involved in that part. We're trying to create the structure so that all that other stuff can happen. And the things you talked about, I think are foundational to that. So thank you.
Yes, Mike, and then Rosie.
Yeah, you're right, Steve. We don't participate in the classroom, but we do model. And I think about Austin's graciousness just in this meeting and the collaboration that inspires for the board and anybody watching this meeting. I think who has aspirations to become a leader will learn that if you want to be a part of an effective board, there's give and take as a part of that process. So even as board members, we're educators.
Thank you. I think Rosie.
Thank you. As I listened to Dr. Bulger talk, I found myself wanting to know more about these fundamentals that you perceive that we need to work on, because what I feel strongly about, really the most strongly about, is that we worked really, really hard as a group, and we came together in a decision to hire Dr. Bulger and to invest in her, our best hopes for LCC and our critical judgments about how well she's operating. And I want to have her back. One of the things I remember reading about in the book was that the greatest resistance to the kind of change, whether it be the slow change or the transformative change, came from inside the organizations, came from inside those institutions of higher education, which is human nature, it's natural. But and that the leaders had to go around the existing faculty or the existing resistance and create opportunities to incubate the kind of changes that were going to make the institution successful. That's real bold, and it requires that the board have the president's back. And so I want to have the president's back 110% of the time. And so I'm interested to hear more about what it is she thinks we need to work on. What are those fundamentals?
Thank you. I'm not going to let her answer that yet.
Okay.
Not yet, but it's coming. Perfect. Thank you, Rosie. Austin.
Mainly, I think Rosie kind of said it a little bit, which is like, how can we support you in pursuing those fundamentals and those things that you spoke about? So yeah, I think that's kind of the, you didn't mention what it was a second theme of what you've heard from the board in your individual conversations, but I hope that it was how can we support our president as she moves forward in this position and as we move forward into this ever-changing world in higher education. So.
Thank you, Austin. Lisa.
Yeah, I really appreciated the priorities and fundamentals that you put forward, Stephanie, and I think it aligns with this thought of being intentional, because what I'm hearing you say is that we have some things to figure out before we design or redesign education, and that we have some fundamentals that we need to address before we move on to some of the bigger picture transformative changes that are possible. And I appreciate that intentionality, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of how we need to care for the longevity of this institution. So I look forward to hearing more about them.
Thank you. Holly.
I also look forward to hearing more about them. I'm curious in what order. And I mean, obviously they all intertwine with each other. So, how can we put one at the top of the other, really? Our enrollment is probably based on the institutional cultural and our fiscal ability to support students. It's just that they're all intertwined. So I'm really looking forward to if you have an order in which you want to approach or how we can support those fundamentals, and like, where do we start? Yes, we all want enrollment to go up. Yes, we want people to have confidence that we have a nice fiscal foundation and solid plan, but institutional cultural is a big issue too. So the institution's cultural landscape, I don't know. So I'm just curious how we're gonna. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to add about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. So I'm holding just a minute to make sure nobody else had anything before I lead you. Okay. Steve, go ahead.
Just very briefly, I've been in a somewhat similar situation once before when I was on the board at eWeb. Stephanie, that's one of our local utilities. And 3-4 years into I was there for 8, and 3-4 years into my tenure, our general manager, moved on to something different. We hired somebody new. he had the advantage of being an internal hire, so he knew the culture, when he took the promotion. But it was clear what happened is he was already listening. Like I said, he was a senior manager, so attended all the board meetings, had been listening for a while, and continued to listen and apply his own thinking. And then I forget exactly 6-8 months into his tenure as general manager, he presented the board with a strategic plan for the next handful of years. I forget how many, and said, this is what based on what I've heard from you, based on my own expertise in the field and what I know of this community and of the shifting landscape, et cetera, very different environment. This is what I think I need to be focused on. And and it comes from, again, listening to what the board wants, what the community needs, what's going on in the environment. And as an expert, and as our expert that we hired, he presented us with a strategic plan and said, this is what I'd like to be. I want your input, but once we settled on it, this is what I want to be evaluated on over the next, whatever it is, handful of years. And then we agreed to it, and we brought it up multiple times a year. We reviewed it. Where are we on these things? And when a big decision was ready, we were preparing to make a big decision, we always came back to that plan. How is this central? And that plan was very powerful, largely because we used it as a guide frequently, and it came from the person with the most with the expertise, which in this case, Stephanie, I believe is you, right? We hired you for your expertise to drive us. We want you to listen to us, and I can tell you are. I'm sure you will. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. But we really leaned into the expertise of our CEO then, and I hope that that's what we do going forward in this situation.
Thank you. Thank you all. And so before we move into, the priorities for the CEO and expectations and getting there, that's going to be right after a break. I want to pull you back a little bit, and I'm going to channel my inner Art Levine, and I'm going to remind you the whole big conversation we just had, because you're moving straight to solutions. I'm shining a light on you for good reason. That's your job, but come back up. And Art might, I like it. He is he likes to peek. He doesn't give solutions. He gives context. He's a futurist. He gives ideas and context. He tells, projects based on history and how he's reading this. So he doesn't give solutions, but he might argue that it's not a matter of solving these problems we have before we address these big changes in higher ed, but these are concomitant and interlaced. And in fact, you can't solve them without a vision and integration and understanding of these changes that are going on. So I'm going to just plant that for you to mull over. You're going to take about a 10-minute break. And when you come back, I want to ask you to answer. You've got a strategic plan in place. You've got vision and mission for the college. Reading this, hearing this, thinking about these changes, does anything change in your strategic priority? Talking to the trustees at this point. Does anything change in your strategic priorities, emphasis, new, different, for Lane Community College? Take about 10, 12, come back at 10 o'clock, and I'll look for your thoughts about that question. Does that make sense? You good? Okay, break time.
Hey, Cindy, sorry.
No,
Really
I
quick.
can't.
Can you repeat that question one more time? I want to write it down.
Oh, for sure, Austin. Does this context that you all seem to be validating, coming from the great upheaval, does that change anything in your thinking about the strategic priorities, the big picture?
Yeah.
I don't mean like any specific things, but strategic agenda, we might call it, for Lane.
Got it.
Sure. All right.
Thank you again.
See you in a minute. So you have any fun planned for this weekend, Austin?
Mostly actually just relaxing by the river, actually. Yeah, I had a few plans, but they kind of fell through. And yeah, and it's going to be crowded over in Eugene. So I'm just going to
Oh,
hang out
that's
by the
right.
river.
You've got the giant, what's it called?
Athletic championships. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. And is the weather hot? I forgot. I didn't bother to look at your temperature this morning.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, actually. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Really, really beautiful temperature. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's helpful if you're going to have hordes of folks coming into town. They have a good environment.
Right now it's cloudy and it's only 63 here.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
I'll send something your way.
Okay.
Sunshine over there.
Although I don't think the weather goes that way.
I know.
Oh my gosh. I was in Sacramento all week and we were having, 102, 103. It was, yeah. And so then we're indoors for meetings all day long, of course, and they over air condition. So I'm freezing all week long.
Yeah, everybody does. The minute the sun comes out, people in Oregon crank up their air conditioning. One of the big, I don't know about you all, but one of the big takeaways for me in reading that book was I kept thinking, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission needs to read this book.
Ooh.
Especially in Oregon.
Ooh.
I think the Lane board should buy copies and send it to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
We can help facilitate that.
Is there a conference that occurs where they show up? Invite Art Levine to speak.
I don't know.
I will be checking out.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
That's a great idea. I bet you he is starting to do a roadshow around the country.
He's everywhere. Yeah, he's everywhere right now. But he loves it and that's what he does. So I think
I thought I watched a couple of videos of each Scott and Art. I thought Scott was the more persuasive speaker.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear, Steve. Mm-hmm. That probably makes sense. Art he's the elder statesman and kind of professorial, and
Scott was sharp as a tack with his points. Cool. An incredible speaker.
Cool. Well, get Scott. That'd be great.
Good to know. Good to know, Steve.
So I had one reaction to Lisa's comment about not losing the human connection.
Do we want to wait till everybody's back? Because that sounds
I'm just making conversation.
Oh, okay, go.
It was that what struck me about the direction Lane's already been going, and what I felt like I was reading in that book is, it doesn't have to be the teacher that has that impact on a student. It could be a counselor, it could be an admissions person, it could be a financial aid person, it could be, but we have to empower all those different, it could be a tutor, it could be a librarian. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, because when you think about that, they talked about that demographic of more mature women who are coming in and not wanting the campus life. I'm worried that they're not putting themselves in a position to have that, potentially to have that kind of interaction with a teacher, but they might with a person who provides a support service.
Yeah.
I don't know, just was a thought.
No, it's absolutely true, Rosie. There's a large national movement, and the new funding was just received by the Institute for Evidence-Based Change. It's a great group. And in fact, Brad lives in Portland, who runs the organization. And the program is called Caring Campus. And it's actually focused on faculty is certainly welcome, but it's for classified professionals in particular on the campuses, and giving them strategies and training, and as much as anything, license, the recognition that their role is student success, and giving them a more formalized role in doing it. So it's some real neat work that's happening across the country. So you can look up Caring Campus and IEBC.
pretty cool.
Angela.
Hey, I've been thinking about, it seems like we're sort of back, so I thought maybe I'd start with some reactions about strategery.
Oh, thank you. Get us back on track, my dear.
I was reflecting, as we were reading the book, we're talking about the book. Steve and I think both discussed, the role of other organizations who provide education. And I was remembering our interviews with Dr. Wolger. I remember writing down so many things that you were suggesting, Stephanie, things that I thought were just so incredibly out of the box, like partnering with workplaces that are investing in their employees. My workplace is investing in their employees. We have something called Pluralsight. So I'm taking a data warehouse design course right now just to beef up those skills while we're working on this project that I'm sort of leading. But LCC doesn't have any role in that, right? And so perhaps that's an opportunity. That's a local company. Straighter line, getting students up to speed on math and English. All of these things that you were talking about that I was like, this is really out of the box thinking. That's great. We'll never be able to do it, but it's really great that she's thinking out of the box. And now reading this book and sort of thinking about the actual future of higher ed and how you said, right at the beginning, Stephanie, you said, we're facing changes that have never been seen before in higher education. You said there's a landscape of higher ed changing in ways we simply haven't seen before. And now I'm thinking these are not things that we'll never achieve. These might be things that we need to prioritize and figure out how to make feasible. And I don't know how that fits in the strategic plan. Frankly, our strategic plan is so long, I forget all the stuff in it.
Thank you so much, Angela, for bringing that perspective and linking it back to what I know is the innovative vision, that Stephanie's bringing you. If I may, I want to drop a pebble in your thinking pond. You don't have to solve this. And when I say you, I mean all of you. I'm talking to the board. It's not your job to come up with the strategies or the how. So when I talk with you and inquire about, should there be any changes in the strategic agenda for Lane? It's big picture. Should a strategic agenda include an understanding of that there are massive changes going on in higher ed, and we may be making massive changes too, or we need a space for that. I don't know what language, what thinking, if that is a direction you're going. You would be setting an agenda. This is it's a moonshot. We want to get to the moon. We're ideal. We have this ideal, and we believe we've got the right leader to take us there. We don't have to tell her how to do it. We just need to say, we're going to hold space and we're going to say, we're going to give you what you need and we're going to the moon. So I hope that can take some of the pressure off of you to try to figure out details about it. But having an understanding of what it might look like, I think is valuable, because if changes of anything like you mentioned or others that haven't were to be pursued in part of Dr. Bulger's strategic agenda, her implementation agenda, it's going to come back to the board. Change causes the boat to rock. And that's where your job comes in as trustees, making sure you're sure of where we're going, and you can help articulate to the larger community, internal and external, what's going on and why. So this is some big why stuff. Does that make sense? Am I preaching too much? Maybe. All right, I'll shut up. Austin.
In regards to your question, how has it changed my kind of perception of strategy and so forth? Is that we should have both short-term and long-term goals, right? I think you mentioned the puck thing, and it reminded me of saying that a hockey player doesn't skate towards a puck; it skates towards where the puck's going. And so anyway, but I feel like there's short-term goals that we can develop and short-term like strategies that we need to have, but we also need to set ourselves up to have the most options as possible in future decisions that we need to make as a board. And I feel like when you have the most options, that's when you you can then kind of do a cost benefit. You have a better ability to do a cost benefit analysis. So essentially, we should, yes, address the issues that we are facing now, but also set ourselves up for those decisions that we need to make in the future, and give us the most options. I feel that many boards felt that what was so detrimental during COVID was that we had very few options, during COVID time period. So, and there's a lot of unknowns. So if we have better knowns and more options, I think the better we will be as a board, and the better capacity that we can have as a board. So yeah, so I feel like that was kind of the biggest thing. I felt like with this book, there was, things that we could do right here, right now, but there's also things that require institutional change, and that's really incremental, and that's something that is kind of a long term.
Okay, so short term, long term. And just so for me to go back to and maybe do a better job of validating Angela's comments, what I heard you saying, Angela, was some excitement, if I may, some anticipation that hopefulness perhaps might be a better way of articulating what I heard, that it could be possible to do some of these innovative things or these needed things that came up in Dr. Bulger's interview process. I got that right.
I will say one of my favorite sayings is hope is not a strategy. So I shy away from it's not a strategy.
Got it. Thank you. Steve.
Could I interject for 1 second on a logistic point? Can someone tell me how to turn on the closed captioning? I can't seem to find a button anywhere on my screen.
Oh.
So I'm wondering if that's something that our
Yeah, it has to be done by somebody.
hosts need to do. Tammy, do you know how to find that if you're running?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, great. Thanks. I really appreciate that. So sorry to interrupt, but I'm occasionally losing a few words. Perfect. Thank you.
Very important. Thank you, Rosie. Hi, Steve. What you got?
Well, I'm responding to the question that you posed before the break, right?
Yes.
What's missing, or how might we
Or
change?
is there?
Is there? Maybe it's just how, so basically, reflections on the strategic plan as it is. So I haven't looked at our strategic plan since in a year, but and that doesn't sound very good for a board member to say, I'm not actually sure what's in it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm saying. And part of the reason is because, in my view, when it's too long, it's too complicated. It says exactly the things that probably every other strategic plan says. Roughly it says we need to improve enrollment, we need to look after our fiscal health, we need to do our environmental, perform, it just says kind of everything. It's too many things, in my view, to focus on. And frankly, I didn't have confidence, I'll be honest, that as a board, we were going to use it to drive ourselves forward. That's the feeling I had over the past year. And I'm not blaming anyone in particular. It's not that, but that happens all the time. Strategic plans get written and then you kind of forget about them. And honestly, I feel like that was sort of our thing. The other thing I'll say is the other person locally here in town that, in addition to Frank Lawson over at eWeb, who I thought did a very good job developing a strategic plan and sticking to it, and getting the institution that, and again, it's a he, but in any case, in the institution that he led, to recognize how serious he was about the strategic plan, is the president at the University of Oregon, Michael Schill. I would say almost everybody, faculty and staff wise, could repeat the thing because because he repeated it all the time, and it was very simple in terms of its wording. He said, all right, I've been here 6 months or something like that after being here 6 months. And based on all the conversations I've had and blah, 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 here's what we're doing over the next 5 years. He would say it's about our focus is access, right, for students. So in that particular thing, that meant, growing scholarships and opportunity and that kind of thing for folks who might not otherwise be able to afford to attend. So access was one, student experience was the other, and that translated to, hands-on opportunities, high touch opportunities for students. And the third was research excellence. And he said it so frequently, everybody knew those are the three things. And whenever you walked into his office and made a proposal, hey, I think we ought to do X, he would say, how does this affect one of those three things? And you knew that question was coming, so you were prepared to answer it. And you didn't bother to show up in his office if you didn't have a good answer to it, because you knew how it would go. And every VP I talked to, along the way said, well, Steve, that's an interesting idea. And they said this to everybody, but I'm going to get asked this question, so you had better be prepared. It's not even going that far unless you know how to, you have a compelling answer to the question. That, regardless of whether you agree those three things should be the top priorities. That's a separate question altogether. That was a case where the strategic plan really drove the institution. And I don't think we have that right now.
Thank you, Steve. Holly?
Steve, I can't agree more with you on that. And I mentioned several times how I feel about actionable items. I totally agree with you about the strategic plan, that it's too long. And if you asked me what was the first point, I probably would not be able to recite it either. But I'm a huge advocate of us being intentional and taking action and actually implementing some of the strategies that we design. And so I totally agree with you about it was too long. It was just too wordy. It was just a lot. And we really need some specifics, right? We need to know what we're working towards. And so I can't agree with you more on that. And having worked under the direction of President Schill at U of O, I seen those things develop. They came up with some strategic plans, and I seen each and every one of those be implemented over the years. And so, I just wanted to echo what you just said about that. I agree totally.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you. And Rosie?
I also agree. I'm also big on actionable items. I have a little different perspective about where we're at. I think the institution and the board spent a lot of time talking about what's important right now, at least at the point in time that we were working on this document. And now we're at the point where, as Austin pointed out, we need to hone in on some short-term top priorities, and we need to be willing to relegate some of the other things to longer-term goals. And I am really supportive of doing that. I mean, I'm interested to hear the president talk about her perception of what the highest priority should be at this particular point in time. But I think we're in a really positive position. I think we have a blueprint, and now we need to go look at that blueprint and say, of the things we felt strongly were important for the health of the organization and for the success of students, what are the things we need to zero in on and agree with the president need to be worked on and action taken right away?
Thank you, Rosie. Lisa?
Sure. Maybe we could go to Austin first, and then I'll go.
Okay, we'll give you a moment. Austin?
Yeah, and I wanted to really empathize with the concept that, sometimes we take strategic plans and we post it on a wall somewhere and we never read it and never look at it ever again, type of thing. And that's not what I want this document to be. And I think in our last meeting, we were wanting this to be a living document. We want it to be a document that is flexible and evolves too. But I also feel like our strategic plan has kind of reflected a lot of what the board has been saying over not only the last year, but also
I think they reflect really well on things that we just read in the book. So it's our strategic goal has common themes. Actually, there's 6 themes: to improve diversity, access, and inclusion, increase enrollment. That's obviously a good short-term goal that we have here. Increase student success, engage in continuous improvement, improve financial stability and sustainability, and identify a strategic infrastructure investment. And and I feel like that's been like so we've been talking a lot about a lot of great things. Angela's made some great points of like facilities, how we should like be rethinking how the use of those facilities. We've been talking about enrollment. We've been and these things I like. So yeah, so I want to absolutely empathize with, yes, strategic plans can be long documents. Yes, it's really easy to kind of like, okay, we got that done. Now we got other fires to put out and stuff. So we'll put the strategic plan over here. But I think we've, not only our administration, our staff, the input that we put into it as a board, which the committees and staff took that and then kind of implemented into the strategic plan. Yeah, I think a lot of the components are there. And I think that we can actually start utilizing these 6 kind of broad goals of the strategic plan in our regular talks as a board, just like that president did at University of Oregon.
Thank you, Austin.
Yeah.
Lisa, is this a good time for you?
I think I'm almost there. Yeah. We just all have to be with my little squeaky voice.
Sure.
So I think one of the things I was hearing Rosie say, but I may also be interpreting it through multiple conversations that we've had, is that we've done the work on setting a vision on the big ideas, which I'm also hearing Dr. Miles say, right? That we don't have to solve the problems. We have to create the bigger vision and provide feedback. And the president is going to lead the college in defining the strategies. And so I think that leads us to what Rosie has often said is our place in the strategic plan. And those are the goals, right? And we tend to get stuck in some of those other more minute details. And I think where we need to stay focused is on the goals. That is the board's place. And 2 of those goals, increasing enrollment and improving financial stability, align very well with what I heard Stephanie articulate. There are 4 more, and those 4 are going, I think, to connect to the 3rd one she identified, which was, I wrote it down, institutional culture. And again, how I don't think I know we put the DEI goal first because we really wanted to, as a board, communicate our intention there. But I agree with Holly that these things, which came first, the chicken or the egg? These things are all interwoven together. But I do think that I have heard from this board some pretty clear commitment to enrollment, financial stability, and making sure that we define an institution, which we are doing those things, but that are focused on increasing student success in a way that promotes diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And those are values that I think are really important to how we define taking on the foundational foundational challenges that Stephanie defined, but as well as moving us to the next transformational opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Excuse me, Angela.
Thank you. just I'm not sure how to phrase this comment that I'd like to make, but I think one of the themes that I observed in this book was that the changing landscape of higher education is in fact an existential threat to many institutions of higher education. And I think that I don't want to encourage us to make decisions based on fear. Just right out of the gate, I don't want to encourage us to make decisions based on fear. But I do want to say that we're not guaranteed to continue existing. There's no guarantee that LCC is around unless we do what it takes to stay relevant and to have the kind of impact that we need to have, the kind of services that we need to have to attract students of the present and of the future. That's all. I was a bit distracted by the chat. I'm sorry, I lost.
Thank you.
My comments.
Thank you very much, Angela. So I'm interested that the discussion went to the strategic plan when that's not what I meant. But it's perfect because this is where you are. And it's I take responsibility for this, clearly, and it's all good. And what I was trying to convey strategic agenda, like the big picture visionary, which could include, at least I think you were saying goals or the board's prerogative. And so, but I think where I heard you all go is a calibration back to exactly what I was asking of you, to assess the strategic agenda writ large that you hold. You're the pace setters, you're the visionaries. You're going to be informed. Good ideas will come from within and without, and books like this, and your leader who's coming in. But it's that I wanted to calibrate with you, have you calibrate with one another to ask yourselves, are we on the right path? Big picture. Have we put enough strategic direction in place for Stephanie to lead in the direction that we believe and are seeing is best for the institution in the context of the changing landscape of higher ed?
I don't think today's the day to answer that, honestly.
Okay.
I wanted,
go ahead.
I think it's a great day for discussion and, around that issue. It's a great day for, to learn more about each other's perspectives and to, to try and hone in on a handful of things. It's a great day for Stephanie to hear from us and vice versa. But I'll just come back to what I said a while ago about how I saw Frank Lawson develop that he's the general manager over at eWeb, a strategic plan. And I think the same thing happened with Mike Schill. The board in both those cases hired a chief executive to distill that strategic direction from all of the feedback that she is hearing from the board, but also based on prior experience. That's a big part of what we hired Stephanie to do, and I would not expect that to come so quickly. I think we're going to have a lot of conversations, including today, over some period of time that will result, in Stephanie saying, "Here you go. Here's my best effort." Open to feedback of where I think we need to head based on, again, her own expertise, but also listening to us. And I think that's 3 or 4 months in, that need that much time to sort of hit the ground and get a feel for things. So this is great. This is great in terms of, exchanging ideas and all that kind of thing. But I wouldn't want to settle on a strategic direction today. I wouldn't want Stephanie to be forced into such a thing today. It takes time.
Great. I love that answer, Steve. And I think it is because it is a perennial question that should always be before a board and to be re-examined in an iterative fashion. So thank you. Rosie.
So I thought I was agreeing with Steve right up until his last couple of sentences. And I couldn't really be in a more opposite space. We have a new one and only employee who's looking for affirmation that what she just proposed to us in the last hour as the three things that she would endeavor to work on first are things that the board would be supportive of and that she could expect to be evaluated on. We're not going to meet again as a board now until early September. I think the new president has plans for a strategic retreat with her own senior executive team. She needs to be in a position to give them some information about where the board supports that she initiates her efforts at Lane to make progress. I personally still very much support the strategic plan goals that this board discussed ad nauseum over the last 18 months and sort of finalized vehemently with the organization, that we're the goal setters and we will be the goal setters. I still think they're the right goals. And what I hear the president saying is, okay, I've read that. I've talked to a lot of people. I've been here 2 weeks. That's a little bit short. But based on what I've gotten so far, these are the three things I think I need to have your imprimatur to begin to develop strategic approaches around. Remember, we're not the strategies people. That's the president's responsibility to identify if we think enrollment is important. If she wants to come back and tell us, I think I need to start a whole other institution over here on the side that does this, that, and the other thing out of the book we just read, that's her job. That's not our job. But she needs to have some reason to go away from today, knowing that she's not going to spend the next 2 months spinning her wheels, not knowing what the board is interested in having her pursue. I mean, my observation of Stephanie is she's ready to get going. She's ready to hit the ground running, and that's exactly what I want her to do. I think we're coming out of a horrible period in Lane's history, every community college's history of dealing with this pandemic and trying to get back on our feet and figure out, holy cow, where do we go from here? And I want that expert we hired to be able to bring her expertise to bear on those questions and those issues. So I understand what you're saying, Steve, but I don't want to belay providing some direction to our employee about our concurrence or our modification of what it is we want her working on next. Because in 6 months, not a year, in 6 months, I'm going to be asking all of you, how do you think she's doing? And you need to have some basis for evaluating that and providing some feedback. And we need to have some basis for discussing that. And Stephanie needs to have some certainty about what that basis will be, so she can perform to her optimum ability. So that's kind of my takeaway from, I think today is critical. I think it's so important today that we leave today with Stephanie having some certitude about what the board will be supportive and have her back if she works on.
Well, I'll just say that there's not too many people who can deliver vehement opposition and have it received with such a smile and appreciation. So thank you, Rosie.
Well done, team. How fun. Mike?
Yes, I agree that as I've gotten to know Stephanie since even before she started officially on the job, there's been no question in my mind that she has been putting 150% of her effort into what her first day, week, month, 6 months, year on this job are going to entail, and how to be most effective in her efforts during those times. So I have no reservations about her capacity to do that. I do think it's important, as difficult as it might be for the board, to give her broad parameters. And that was a second point that I wanted to make, is that a theme that I've heard us reinforce during our retreat so far today is the importance of the distinction between the board's role and the president's role, and that the board stay at the broad policymaking, goal setting level, and that we empower and authorize and inspire our president to do what she's good at, and that is to motivate and lead the staff to accomplish those goals that we set. And then the last thing that I have to say is a bit more specific with regard to the three statements that Stephanie offered. And that is the one about enrollment. I have to admit that I've been thinking about enrollment in the way we stated it, I think, in our strategic plan, and that was increase enrollment. After reading the book, I'm not sure that that's the goal. That implies that we're looking for numbers. We want more people to be enrolled. And I guess I'd like to step back and give Stephanie permission or authorization from the board to think about that enrollment question more broadly, because I don't think the board should be saying we want bigger numbers necessarily. We want the college to be stable. We want it not to be stable, but we want it to be growing and expanding in its importance and impact and contribution to the community and to our students. That may or may not translate into increasing our enrollment by X%. So I'm not sure what it translates into, but I want to be careful to not give Stephanie the impression, at least I think her goal is to increase our enrollment by a certain percentage, but more importantly, to make Lane a stronger component in contributing to the education of our students in our region.
Thank you, Mike. You're leading me to think, and I'd like to offer this as an option for all of you. It occurs to me that it would be valuable. I want to, if we could, we'll go ahead and we need to fully have this conversation about, strategic priorities, this big picture strategic agenda, but then maybe move back to these three elements that Stephanie has proposed and unpack them one by one, hear from her what she means a little more about in fiscal stability, what she means by enrollment, what she means by institutional culture. So you can ask deeper questions, we can calibrate, because it will be, this is the point that was raised earlier, if this is, you collaborate and agree on this prioritization of expectations and agenda, you need to all have shared understanding of what they mean. Does that sound okay? Okay, super. So we'll continue, we'll wrap this up. We've got Lisa and Steve hands raised talking about big picture strategic priorities, and then perhaps move to that next topic of unpacking those priorities, if that sounds okay. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that clarification that we were talking about strategic priorities versus a strategic plan.
Words, I mean.
But I do recall from my conversation with you, the first time we met, you, Rosie, and I walking away with an aha of like, oh, I think our board needs to work on understanding that difference and our role in identifying the priorities and supporting the president in their role. So I think it's kind of helpful that we had that little bit of misstep, perhaps we could call it, and then recalibrate, right? So, yeah, we learn through making mistakes.
Well,
you know.
I wouldn't call it a mistake, except maybe on my part. And I will share with you, and then I want to hear the rest. When I would work on this with my board, you know, for 11 years, and then with others and trying to learn from the best, et cetera, we moved to a language of board priorities. We had to just come up, and you need to come up with your own words. The board set the priorities for the district. And then from there, the goals within the strategic plan would flow, you know, so maybe you might want to play with language that would help you. Anyway, go ahead.
So I, like Rosie, I support the strategic plan goals that we came up with, but I want to hear more from Stephanie about those 3 priorities that she established. I do think they align with many of the recent conversations we've been having, particularly around enrollment and fiscal health. Climate is one that I think has an impact on both of those things in many, many ways. And you know, I think part of what I see the balance being here is this intentionality that we need to have, but also kind of going back to what Angela said, that, right, there's no guarantee that LCC will continue to exist unless we do the work to make sure that we're still relevant. And so it's balancing this intentionality with a sense of urgency. And so that's why I think it's really important that we do establish and calibrate around that. So Stephanie can move forward with today's meeting, work with her cabinet, and be ready to you know, have a very effective and intentional beginning to her presidency for the benefit of the institution. So I'm excited to hear more.
Thank you. Thank you. Steve, back to you.
Very briefly, since I was the one apparently that detoured us. Thanks, Rosie, for the gracious reminder. And thank you for, you know, keeping us on the straight and narrow. I just want to also then to respond the first 2 in any case, that Stephanie, that you mentioned, the fiscal and the enrollment broadly, right? You didn't tell us what you were going to do necessarily about either, but that those would, you know, so we'll hear more about that. So that's sort of in keeping with Mike's comment. I heard you say enrollment, but I didn't hear you say increase enrollment, but that a thing that we really need to think about and get clear about. We'll hear more from you. Those 2, I am, you know, I think I said it before, but I just wanted to underscore it. I am in very strong support of those 2 priorities that you are asking us for feedback on. Institutional culture, it's not that I'm not against it. I don't want to come out sounding like that. That's one I'd want to hear more about. That terminology is just pretty squishy, and it can mean so many different things. So for that reason, I would just want to understand that one a little bit more before you know, before weighing in on it. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Making sure there's no other thoughts or comments that anyone wants to make in a general fashion about strategic agenda, you know, for the board. It feels like you're ready to get down to more brass tacks to me, and for us to talk a little bit more specifically about goals and expectations for your CEO. And so your CEO has presented to you 3 priorities, and perhaps the way to, I'll propose this, Stephanie, feel good to you. Maybe you want to unpack each one. We'll take them one by one. Let's do one at a time and unpack it. Give your thoughts about what that might mean. Get questions, comments back from your board members, and then move to the next. And then we'll see if there's anything missing. Are there any other goals and priorities that you want her to think about beyond these 3? And then we'll get some calibration. Sound good?
Sounds great to me.
All right. Where would you like to start?
The first one that I mentioned is called Fiscal Situation. It seems to be the one of the foundations. In fact, these could be, in my mind, they're like three legs of the stool. Sort of one to hold the institution together and also to help the institution move forward. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it. But the fiscal situation in terms of that is to gain some clarity around what the fiscal situation is, so that the board has clarity around it, but the institution itself, everyone who works in the institution, has clarity around that as well. So there would be some transparency, a lot of transparency around what the current fiscal situation is. And so there would be some steps that I would bring back to the board related to how that would be accomplished to gain an understanding about the fiscal picture, and then to continue providing reports throughout the year and throughout the years on what that fiscal picture is. At this time, it's so changing, dynamic, I would say, in terms of the fiscal picture, that frequent reports to the board would be appropriate. And so that is what I would want to bring to the board, is the process and approach that the institution would be taking for clarity in the fiscal picture, and then bringing reports all along the way to monitor that fiscal picture. So I know that is general. The other part of fiscal situation is understanding the areas of opportunity. There are areas of opportunity that we could just think about right now. What comes to my mind are grants, for example. There are lots of grants out here, grant opportunities, but there are also partnership opportunities to leverage what the institution does and does well with other organizations. Some of those, as Angela mentioned, I did mention some of those in my interview. I have pretty much a long and working list in my mind of what some of those organizations are. So leveraging what we do best as an institution, as a college, an institution of higher education, leveraging that with through partnerships. And those partnerships can also be local partnerships, I think K-12, with the universities in the area. There are lots of ways to leverage what we're doing in order to assist with the fiscal situation. And I would finally offer that the foundation is key. The LCC Foundation, I think, is really, really key to being able to help with the fiscal situation that we will find ourselves in. But so that there's clarity, I started with that. So that there's clarity around the fiscal picture, then I would want to start with that, and then these other components would be attached to that.
So if I'm hearing you clearly, Dr. Bulger, it sounds like, short-term clarity, transparency, understanding, shared understanding, and then while you're concomitantly working on longer-term solutions.
Yes.
Austin, I see your hand and we're going there. I feel compelled to drop a skunk in the tea party right now, because that's my job as a facilitator, is to make sure we're honest and open and we can get as far together as we can. And if I'm wrong, you all can just jump up and tell me so, please. I'm sharing an observation I've made in the little bit of time I've had one-on-one with each of you, and then observing a couple of your board meetings. My sentiment, my observation is you do not have shared understanding and belief about your fiscal situation.
That's true.
I hear some of you say, we've had a budget deficit for 5 years, we're in trouble, it's going on, etc. And I hear others of you say, we've worked really hard, we've balanced this, we're in a good place, we've cut here, we've outsourced there, we've built up a reserve here. And a fundamental difference in saying we're okay fiscally and we're not okay fiscally. And maybe there's a couple of you in the middle that go, I don't know for sure. But that's what I'm hearing. And I want to see if I'm perhaps I just put that out there. If you don't mind, Austin, I don't want to jump on your parade because you've got an important comment to make, but it felt important for me to lay this first, because what I think I'm hearing Dr. Bulger say is she's wanting to get transparency and clarity of understanding and belief. There's a difference about the Lane's fiscal situation. And I think that extends to the board as well as the college community, if I'm correct.
Totally. Yeah. I will say that, yes, you're right. And I think many of us can partially agree that we have a different idea of what the fiscal situation is for our community college, which is why transparency and clarity would be beneficial for our board, and which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited about hearing this from you, Dr. Bulger, as well as we're going into this legislative session that's coming up with a new governor, new legislators, new priorities that the state is going through, and also with the grants and partnership opportunities through Future Ready Oregon. Yeah, this is a really key priority that can give that I feel that can set ourselves up both for the short term and long term. So yeah, no, so this so to answer your question, yes, there is a difference in opinion about the financial well-being of this institution. Absolutely. But I think that can be resolved through clarity and transparency and further conversation. At the same time, I see that this leg in the three-legged stool, the stool that you spoke of, is really important with the future that we're in, the time period that we're in. So I just want to kind of emphasize that as far as a priority and a goal.
Thank you, Austin. Steve?
Well, I appreciate, Stephanie, that you said fiscal situation. I like that second word that you added in there. And also appreciate Cindy's really, astute observation about what I agree, we have a difference of opinion on the board as to where we're at, and it's hard to move forward. But I shouldn't say that. I mean, right, we have a voting process, so we move forward every time when it comes down to it, but we don't have general agreement. And I would probably, even though I have a strong opinion about this, I'm also totally open to the idea that I could be wrong about how dire potentially our situation is. I'm open to that because, the budget book is 90 pages thick and I haven't read it word for word. So yeah, do I fully understand our budget? No, I don't. And nonetheless, I've come away with an opinion of it. Back to the situation issue, this is an observation now, and it does get a little bit into the weeds, but it also is something that has affected, I think, the board directly in the 1 year that I've been on the board. I haven't been here that long. We would frequently be presented with financial information and other kinds of information from our past president, and as well from Paul. A lot of that sort of thing was, and others, delegated to senior staff. And then we basically had a process, and this is, I think Stephanie's very focused on process. We had a process whereby, informally anyways, the LCCA would reach out to individual board members or the board as a whole with information that would compete, right, with what the administration's perspective was. And I'll set aside the fact whether or not the competing information was accurate or inaccurate. But from a process perspective, it would be very difficult for a board member to respond in the moment because of to that competing information, and ultimately it would undermine their goal to some extent was to undermine the trust that we had in our president and our provost, and it was effective. That's a process issue, right? Because frequently the way that information would come to us was at the last minute without an opportunity for the president, provost, leadership team to adequately be prepared and respond to it. So we had these two competing sets of information, and it's sort of hard to know what to do with all of that, especially in the moment. So in response to Stephanie's interest in focusing on fiscal situation and providing frequent, updates to the board so that we can have a common understanding of the situation, not what to do about it, but at least the situation. I see that it's very important that we can at least agree on process going forward. How do we get our information? How do we challenge and offer LCCA and other folks? Like, everybody should have that opportunity. How do people adequately respond, challenge it, but ultimately come away with some common set of facts, because that's not what we have right now.
Thank you. Other questions or feedback for Stephanie on this first item, fiscal situation as she's describing it?
A good way to kind of share information with us is to, because yeah, we could be a board that only gets our information from presentations, slideshows, and PowerPoints, right? But there are opportunities for us to actually go out into the world, go out into our institution, and see the benefits, the costs, the detriments of if certain actions aren't taken, or because we've taken certain actions, and so forth. So yeah, so I think there's opportunities for us to be invited to events and circumstances and situations and so forth that can help expand our knowledge and capacity as a board of the situation as well. Yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to suggest that as well. I've personally, as a board member, have tried to get out there and find out more information and hear from businesses, community members, faculty, staff, and attend events, students. And yeah, I definitely feel like I am richer because of that knowledge that I've gained from those experiences. So as opposed to just looking at PowerPoints, documents, and so forth.
Thank you. I wonder what it would take for you to all come to a collected understanding and belief in whatever the fiscal situation is. Rosie?
Trying to keep the Wonder Pup from interrupting.
Wonder Pup.
I think it would take some time, and exactly what Steve and Austin are talking about. I mean, I think the board needs to be willing to commit some time and energy to presentations from Dr. Stalliard, to working through the questions board members may have, those board members who've been on a long time, who see long-standing patterns, and board members who've been on a shorter period of time who may think, well, gee, we've fixed everything that seemed to be broken and we keep moving forward. I mean, I just, I especially support what Steve is talking about in terms of, last minute challenges to the administration that we have vested our ostensible trust in are just not helpful. But by the same token, it's okay to have a different view of the world and attempt to take the facts and organize them to support your view of the world, which is what I would expect our unions to do. But when that comes at the last minute, there's no opportunity to really, for the board to really process that information in a very productive fashion. And so I like, perhaps creating some procedures the board would like to put in place to welcome that feedback, but to do it in a way that we can really make productive use of differing points of view. And the only thing I guess I would observe about Austin's suggestion is I really like the idea of the board doing, Dr. Bolger and I had talked about possibly doing listening sessions in the community. We could do listening sessions on campus as well, I suppose, but it's so important for the board to not confuse college employees, and for differing board members with perhaps differing points of view to engage, proactively with college employees. It's just something that we need to be in unison around and careful. The board does have an adopted one voice policy, so there's always one person who represents what is the board's approved sort of point of view, and so I just make that observation. It's important to be a little careful about that. It's really not our job to dialogue outside what the board has already discussed and sort of adopted a point of view around.
Thank you, Rosie. Lisa?
So I agree it would be worth committing the time and energy to do this, and I appreciate the focus on process. One thought that also did occur to me is that during the entire time that Dr. Hamilton was president, she never really had a VP of Finance and Infrastructure in a stable way. And so for the entire time that I've been on the board, we have lacked leadership in this area of the institution during some very critical moments. And I think we've all recently seen some very good examples of the outcome of that. I am incredibly excited about Dr. Stalliard joining the team at LCC. I think he's going to bring great leadership in that position. And I also think that it highlights the point that we want to make sure the president has the team around her to be effective. And so I think that even though that may move outside of financial situation, just my experience as a board member really amplifies the need to make sure we support Dr. Bulger in that area.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question of the dissonance between information that's presented at board meetings by the administration versus information that comes in through public testimony. And I have to say that it is often very different or would lead the board to different conclusions. I could be persuaded otherwise, but I'm not sure that there's a process way to easily address that, and that we may have to learn to live with that dissonance. I'm sure that often it is one of the unions that's presenting the information that might contradict information from the administration. But I assume that they are doing the best they can to get information together in a timely way, and that they have slightly different interests. And I mean, their job is to represent the employees, and they will look at information through that lens, and that we may just have to accept that there is going to be dissonance. I also believe, though, that when information is presented from through public testimony that contradicts the college, that or what's being presented by the administration, that we need to do what Marge has done, and that is to try to clarify for the board, and the board then needs to take that clarification and weigh it, and that may be the best we can do. If somebody's got an idea about a better way to do it, I don't think the way to do it is to tell people presenting public testimony that you have to get it in advance 48 hours or anything like that. I just don't think that that's a viable approach. Maybe there's a third approach that I'm not thinking of, but I'm guessing we need to learn to live with the dissonance, but we also need to accept the responsibility to clarify differences of opinions, and that allow the administration to present that clarification to us.
Thank you, Mike. That's the hard job of the trustee, so frequently. Holly?
It is. I am wondering, first of all, we were really fortunate to have Marge, who was her communication was just right on par when we did get public responses. I'm wondering if there are any rules around, Steve mentioned this before. I mean, we can literally be in a meeting and we're still getting texts and comments from public or from union members or representative of staff. And as a newer board member, it was just like coming at, and then the president's responding, and then we get another, and it's just like, so the dissonance was definitely there. But I'm just wondering from some of my veteran trustees, has there ever been a policy or a rule at some point? Can they when do they stop? You know, we're in a meeting and you're getting texts, you know, saying, you know, giving their side of the situation, and here we are getting ready to vote, and it's like, oh my goodness, all this is coming at us at a point when the president's sitting right next to us, so she really doesn't have an opportunity to respond at that point, right? And so you're just hearing this one side, and I'm just curious, maybe somebody can help me there. Is how when can they stop, or can they just keep going on forever and ever up till the time we vote, and asking us questions about their, you know, and giving us information and sharing their side, you know, their point of view. And so that's just been my experience, and it can be a little, you know, not intimidating, but like, okay, which one is true? What's, you know,
You could just
what's
lose
right,
your
what's
cell
wrong?
phone before you come to the meeting.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing in the end.
Yeah, there you go.
But as a newer member, you know, that
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for that. And so when it was happening, I was just like, whoa, you know. So anyway.
You know, Holly, thank you for your honesty about that, because it's a tough one. You know, it's a tough one. And I think that not everyone admits this challenge. I think Mike had a comment, and I think I saw another hand, but I lost it. So we'll come back. And I want to move it. I'm going to, as a preface, let's not go down this rabbit hole too deeply, because we need to make sure we're getting Stephanie what she needs. Holly, we need to answer Holly and help as a board collectively, but I'm seeing further work that you're going to need to do together, maybe more conversations, Dr. Bulger coming back with some ideas as things emerge. So let's go a little quickly, Mike, and then Steve.
Well, I'd just like to thank Holly for raising the point. I've seen the same phenomenon on multiple boards. I am guilty of sending texts to board members during meetings, and we as board members have the prerogative to decide how we want to respond to that. And I think it warrants further conversation by the board.
Thank you, Mike. Steve?
Yeah, also thanks, Holly. I, like you, especially in the first 6 months or whatever, I too was getting tons of texts in the middle of things, you know, and I get fewer of them now, I think largely based on how I've responded to those things. That they're testing us, you know, as they should, you know, they have a perspective. And so I'm not at all trying to squeeze out other, you know, alternate perspectives. What I'm calling for is some kind of process by which we, you know, manage all of that information. So, because I think this is one of the most important issues that we are facing as a board. Based on my conversations with both Marge and Paul, this is the prime reason why they left, because they felt ultimately unsupported by their board when a powerful perspective from essentially from the faculty union comes forward, and we're all susceptible to that because you know, because these are elected positions and they have a lot of sway in the community. And I am absolutely certain we lost our last leadership entirely, not entirely. That's an overstatement. Significantly on this issue. And again, I want to underscore the point that I very much value the perspective of our unions. The unions, and I've seen this at the University of Oregon where I work, they're the only people who can, you know, other than the president, who can speak honestly and openly about their perspectives, because they're protected, right? You never see people like me at the University of Oregon stand up in a meeting and say, you know, Mr. President, you know, you're wrong, here's why, blah, blah, blah. The union does every day, all the time. Their perspective is so valuable for that reason. It's honest, it's unvarnished, often. It's not necessarily always accurate in my perspective, but it's incredibly valuable. I will always hold it valuable, but there has to be some kind of a, there has to be some kind of a discussion or an understanding about how we receive that, when we receive that, how we, for me, it would be perfectly reasonable if I get a text from the union, and I get them all the time saying, she's not telling the truth right now. They're talking about our former president. She's misrepresenting right here, right now. If I was to voice that and say, hey, I'm just getting a text that's, calling into question what you're saying. All right, let's have a discussion about that. But, it doesn't quite work that way because it doesn't feel like, that would be impolite, and all kinds of things or dynamics come into it. And they ultimately serve, in my view, to undermine the authority of the president, who we are saying over and over and over, we want to support. That is the way that we chase away people with significant talent. Happened to Paul for certain. And I think it happened to Marge too. So I think of this as foundational to our success and Stephanie's success moving forward. I don't have an answer precisely what we should do, but it for me, it was poison.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Angela?
I'll be very brief. We do have a policy about public comment that we expect written communication to be submitted at least 24 hours in advance in order to be included in the board packet. Obviously, that doesn't preclude anyone from emailing or texting or anything like this, but for it to be officially a part of the board packet is meant to be submitted 24 hours in advance. And I think that we edited that policy, if I recall, somewhat recently in response to receiving written materials at the moment. We had hoped that this would create an opportunity for the administration to be able to review the materials that are being submitted and have some kind of conversation about that.
Thank you, Angela. Rosie?
Good thing I was muted when I said, damn it.
But we just thought you were talking to the dog.
What I started to say was I'll be quick. I think this is a really important conversation. I would really like to have it. I am actually this much more interested in hearing Dr. Bulger talk about the other two issues, but I just want to put a pin in this and say that I'm committed to coming back to this because it could be equally important to our colleagues in our unions to understand how we will or won't, take as credible anything that they bring forward. So I wish we could move forward.
Yeah, I think I'm feeling that as well, Rosie. And Stephanie, I think you're here. You've got a lot from this conversation. Have you got what you need on this topic for now?
I do. All
right. You take us to number 2. Oh,
absolutely. I will be a partner in bringing you some approaches and strategies because this is an institution with everyone in it. The unions are there and everyone in this institution, which I support. So let me talk a little bit about enrollment strategy. And I'm thinking about that in 2 ways. One is an immediate way. There really is no doubt in my mind that there is a need for an immediate strategy to impact enrollment for fall quarter, winter quarter, spring quarter, and summer quarter of next year. So there's some immediate steps that I believe that Lane Community College can take, and certainly that would be in talking with my team, and I think in an expanded kind of way. When I say team, I'm not just talking about the cabinet, but talking about that in an expanded sort of way. And that would be for all of for enrollment broadly, and enrollment strategy broadly, and it would impact our centers, international students. It would every student that we're currently serving, but even those that we're not. So the questions with respect to a longer term, and I say longer term with some reservation because I am a firm believer in building the plane as you fly it, actually. So we're thinking about not just longer term, but we're thinking about doing that at the same time that we are working on this immediate strategy with which we hit the ground running on. And so that would involve conversations and honing in on what business are we in? What education business are we in? And what does that mean for the populations that we serve in terms of getting to differentiation, the core competencies? What is Lane good at doing? I've been asking those questions and not getting a lot of different answers, but not similar answers oftentimes. And so it would be honing in on who we serve and what our core competencies are. And I believe that is it with respect to enrollment strategy right now.
Thank you, Stephanie. Questions, feedback for Stephanie on item number 2.
I heard a number of people comment about the fact that they want to be able to consider enrollment outside of numbers, but what does enrollment mean for Lane? And so I'm personally supportive of some subsequent board work session conversation with the president about what does that mean? Are there differing ways to think about enrollment that make more sense for Lane? And if we're going to be evaluating you on some progress with respect to those other things, what are they? What are we talking about?
Thank you, Rosie. Austin.
And to partially answer that, so yeah, obviously the danger of going, we want X percentage increases over the year is that we could have like a 10% increase one year, but then we have a 15% decrease the following year, right? So what you want is just a sustainable kind of continuation of growth and stuff like that. And that's why there's both short-term and long-term goals that you can create around that. But the long-term goal is to actually create a culture of higher education that when we have graduates from a K through 12 system, they're going to think Lane Community College. And what I actually would love to have them think is, and actually what I want the entire community to think is that when they think of higher education, when they think of training, when they think of like, I need skills, Lane. And that can be done through there's different models of like higher education corridors, where essentially when people think higher education, you think of this institution. And the partnerships that we can develop that expand programs, give a more variety of different programs, give programs that are just in time, the one that's focused on local workforce needs and so forth. Yeah, so that's why there's kind of like the both short-term and long-term, but there's also targeted populations that we could be reaching out to and create smaller goals around targeted populations. Like for instance, dual enrollment is a perfect example of a population of students that we could be reaching out to. There was a great quote in here, and it was essentially that for economic stability and futures, the labor force, it's a better investment to educate the labor force better than paying them unemployment wages. There's a program called TUI, which stands for Training Unemployment Insurance, which allows for people that are on unemployment insurance to go get an education certification, short-term trainings, and so forth. And targeting those potential populations and giving them easy access and pathways to our degree programs and so forth is another great targeted population, especially if we go into recessionary time periods. So so there's both short-term and long-term goals. Short-term goals, I think, is more population targeting, and long-term goals is cultural change within our community.
Thank you, Austin.
If any of that makes sense, okay.
Well, if I can add some commentary, Austin, I love the innovative thoughts, and you're obviously a reader and collecting these ideas. And I have, you and I've had a couple of conversations, and I have some models from friends who are doing some major consortia, and I can share these. And I have to, it's my job to say to you, Austin, the solutions are not your job. So when you come up with these great ideas, it's your job to give them to your president and let him go. Fair enough? Thank you. Thank you. Lisa.
So I appreciate that you organized your thinking, Stephanie, around immediate impacts, because I think it's critical we get traction on this quickly, while at the same time concurrently working on long-term strategies, right? So we don't have to wait to see what happens with the immediate strategies. We're doing these things concurrently. And I also agree with what Rosie said about board work sessions and these needed conversations about what that means to look at the long-term enrollment outside of just thinking about it as a number, because I think clearly we've seen that just thinking about it as a number may not have been the most successful approach. I think we have to take a look at it in a broader perspective, and perhaps in terms of populations, or how are we accessing opportunities or potentials? I think we all know there are opportunities and potentials to access out there, similar to what Angela mentioned earlier about what she's seeing within her own business community and how they're receiving education. And so I do think I appreciate their approach, and also think that even though you're thinking of this as a foundational priority that needs to happen, I think it'll also help us begin to have the conversations to think about those transformations we want to be working towards, and that it'll be important for the board to have those conversations to be able to move from the foundational challenge to being able to think about what education business are we in, and how do we design education as an institution that transforms the lives of students and learners in Lane County, or potentially globally, as we're seeing.
Thank you, Lisa. Steve?
Stephanie, I heard you say that with regard to enrollment, you have some, immediate ideas that would impact, fall, winter, spring, and even next summer. But I didn't hear details about what those include. So, and I'm all for that, by the way, because we did pass a budget that requires a 2% increase in enrollment in order for that, budget to work in the black and not in the red. So in any case, I'm all for some immediate focus, even if it turns out that, a year from now you say, well, let's recalibrate and go in a different direction, whatever. But I do think we need to be trying things in the short term, which is roughly how I interpreted what you said. What I want to hear some more detail on is since you suggested that you're going to take some immediate action, I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about what that is.
Sure. I would like to, sorry, Cindy, I don't know.
No, please. I was just going to say, do you want to respond?
Oh, sure. So I do want to respond, and some of this is not, I'm not being evasive. It's just that I want to talk to the team a bit more, and I'm more of the team all the time. So it will help me kind of hone in on what these ideas are, the ones that are viable. But certainly I think it came up here that perhaps there is a dual enrollment strategy that's not being optimized, I would say. Maybe there is a dual enrollment strategy. Maybe there's a strategy in the terms of older adults. Maybe there's a strategy in terms of working with businesses, the small businesses, local businesses here. Maybe there's a strategy working with companies, some of the companies that I mentioned when I interviewed, actually. Maybe there's a strategy working with them as well. So, but then there may be some creative ways that the institution I know is already working on. For example, when students are in the queue to register, but they actually perhaps are in a bottleneck and they can't quite register, it can't quite turn over to that registration. It can be a bottleneck that results in people not registering at all. And so I know that those efforts are underway. So there are lots of different strategies. I think what we're going to be able to bring to the board in very short term are a list of those strategies, who's going to be responsible for those strategies, and when we are going to do those strategies, and what happened when we did those strategies. Because what I want to help create in Lane Community College is a culture that's agile. So failure is okay, is the tone that I'm going to be setting, that failure is okay. It just means that we're learning from that, but we will have multiple strategies. And I don't expect that all of them will fail. I think that some of them will be very, very successful. And I did get to the teaching and learning aspects. And so the kinds of modalities that the institution is actually delivering or offering to the public. I didn't also get to marketing and communications and how we are actually telling the public that our doors are open and we'd like for you to come and have education in these various ways in a very, very clear message. So I hope that helps. I'm not being very specific in terms of actually what we will do, but hopefully I'm specific in terms of how I'm thinking about it, and that all of the team in a broad sort of way will be involved in structuring that. We need the faculty. We need the classified professionals. We need our grounds persons. We need our public safety individuals. We need everyone in the institution, our managers, our deans. We need everyone in the institution and our foundation to help us.
All right. Well, just a quick response. I know Holly has her hand up, but I'm all for that. I'm very supportive. What I hear you saying is that's a big focus of yours this summer, and that we will hear more about what's working and what's not, and how that changes your thinking going forward. So I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve, I'm trying to squeeze this to have at least a couple of minutes to talk about how will you know and measure progress. So your expectations in that regard. So maybe we'll try to get that in before the end. Holly.
I'm so excited to hear about your strategies. I'm a huge fan of marketing. And so I'm just hoping that in those strategies, as Tammy says, or Cindy says, we give you gifts and then we let it go. I hope that in our marketing strategies and outreach and recruitment, that we will highlight some of the people who have been there, who've graduated. That wonderful woman and our speaker at graduation, she was an international student, I believe. And there were lots of them. And so in marketing, just similar to Mrs. Gregory, when I was in 4th grade, I related to her. She looked like me. She was my first Black teacher. She taught me all these things, right? But think about our K through 12 students. When they see somebody that looks like them, who came from where they came from, and they graduated and they did it. So I'm hoping that in your marketing strategies that we can see some of that in the future. They want to see a student from a rural area who went through LCC and who got a job, in CTE, I think that that's going to be really important in our outreach and recruitment for students, to see someone who looks like them, who completed a program, right? Who came from a marginalized population. So I don't see that a lot here. I've never seen it at LCC. I mean, once in a while I see a banner with a person of color on the LTD bus, that says go to LCC, but I never see a commercial that interviews a student who came from, nominal means and went through LCC and graduated. And it looks like someone who I work with in K through 12, like Austin was mentioning, it should be part of the conversation when students think about higher ed. They should think about LCC, right? That's one of their go-tos. So I would just love in your marketing strategies, I always bring this up, to see for our students or our community members, to see an adult educator, a non-traditional older student who went through a program at Florence campus, and completed it. And, I don't see that different populations. I actually never seen a commercial of somebody who said, I went to LCC and I graduated and I got my degree. I rarely see that. Person of color.
Beautiful gift you're giving her, Holly. So
anyway,
thank you.
My gift to you.
All right.
First day at work.
Yeah, 2 weeks in, but I can tell she likes these gifts. Beautiful. All right. And I can't help but think about on the enrollment, how one of the mantras is the easiest student to enroll is the one you've got.
That's right.
It's also enrollment. So, all right. You want to take us to number 3?
Absolutely. Institutional culture. And this really is about the climate, the current climate that we find ourselves in. And so building a sense of trust within the climate, taking a look at the climate survey. I had a chance to take a look at some climate survey results that was done, facilitated by a national organization called Gallup. And so this is something that the team is going to be discussing probably with College Council and with others, is what those results entailed. Institutional culture also consists of innovation and excellence. Those are values of LCC that we want to raise up. At least under my leadership, I'd like to raise up those particular values of excellence and innovation. That speaks to culture as well. And also the support of leadership, the supportive leadership in the institution, leadership at all levels, but so that the institution has a feeling of that they are supported and that they are trusted and that they are empowered to do their jobs. So this institutional culture also consists of bringing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, into the center of the organization, so that DEI is the way that we do business. And individuals can articulate almost naturally how DEI is actually incorporated into every aspect of our work. And so that's institutional culture. Many of these, in terms of how to carry it out, many of these will take some time. Again, I'm thinking about some foundational strategies at first, some things that we start with, and then building on those. So you would see changes as we are able to accomplish and build on these strategies. Then you will see different strategies that will show progress in the institution. I'm a firm believer that you must start where the institution is. You can't start somewhere else. So I'm still learning about where the institution is on some matters related to institutional culture. But what I do see right now is that that's an area that could use some strengthening. That's why it's on my list.
Yes, Austin.
I really, you mentioned earlier that we shouldn't have a culture of fear of failure within the institution and so forth. And would this be applicable in this area of your goal as well? And second question, where in this would you say is like the recruitment and retention of BIPOC staff, faculty, employees, and for that matter, students in this goal?
Austin, I really appreciate the question, because I just don't see diversity, equity, and inclusion as separate from any other work that we do. So my intention would be to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into the center of the organization, into everything we do. So in terms of hiring processes, we would be able to articulate to the board how we're doing that. And what the board should be able to hear is that diversity, equity, and inclusion are considered in those practices, in those processes. That's my intention. And so with respect to innovation, I think is where you would see some of those not being fear of failure. I think we need a place, not more than a sandbox, which is what we're accustomed to in higher ed, is sort of creating sandboxes where people play with gadgets. But I think we need much more than that, much more than a sandbox, so that in diversity, equity, and inclusion are infused in innovation, but done so in a way that we don't fail. What we do is we learn from our practice. We learn from our practice. We iterate. We move forward.
No, it's a really great strategy for innovation, growth, and expansion. Many companies that remove that fear of failure in their organization see a lot of different good results, both in the work capacity, but also the work that's being done. So I'm hearing that from you made me happy to hear that. So thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Any other comments or questions on this third priority of institutional culture? Thoughts, reactions?
I think perhaps the issue that was raised during an earlier discussion about about how information, how decisions are made, and how information is shared, also goes to institutional culture. It's a very different, different component of DEI, right? It's not the one that maybe we think of first, but I think we have a serious problem at a very high level with this institution. With regard to that. So I don't want that. Institutional culture, I think, is actually a very important thing. I don't think it's something I think we've been pretty hands off, honestly, because we're afraid of what might happen if we push back a little bit. But I think we got a real problem.
It speaks to trust as well. I think trust in the environment and the 5 dysfunctions of a team. You probably read that book. In the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the reason why teams don't, one of the reasons why teams are not productive or is because there's a lack of trust. That's just one of the reasons. But I think it's really fundamental to having Lane move forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Lisa, I believe you're next.
I'm really excited to hear that the areas that you've defined, particularly that focus on climate, and building trust. I think my very first board meeting, we began having conversations about a climate survey, and there were some really distinctive particular challenges at that time that I think are still very relevant, and they relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion in a pretty significant manner. I'm not going to go into them deeply, but I feel like we never really got a lot of traction on it, and part of that was definitely the pandemic. But I'm really glad that you're going to be prioritizing that. And I'm also not surprised, but also excited to be thinking about how to make DEI built into the center of how we do work as an institution. I know that's a really challenging thing to do, and I think, we have to keep shining a lens on it. And so I hope that in the similar fashion that you've thought about process in other areas, and how we can have transparency and articulation in other areas, I hope we can do that there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Rosie, you're up.
Thank you. What I found myself thinking about when Steve brought up how information is shared and how decisions are made, I think the board has some responsibility to do some work in that area as well. I think we as a group who are the ultimate decision makers in the organization could probably do more to, and it may be that conversation that I made a note to bring us back to at a future work session about the unions sending alternative information and texting, and how does the board respond and so forth and so on. That whole area could perhaps benefit from some board dialogue with each other about what makes sense for us as individuals charged with the responsibility that we have for setting policy. How do we make decisions? How can we be more transparent about our decision-making process? So I've made a note to bring us back to all of that for sure. And I just wanted to say, I think the board has some work to do in that area as well.
Thank you, Rosie. Holly.
Thank you. So Dr. Bolger, you made a really, I think, important comment about how DEI intersects with everything we do. It's not separate, right? And my comment to that is, it's almost like what Lisa just mentioned about the climate survey. Whether we're in COVID or not, I almost think that that's like the first thing that needs to be done, so that we can see how it informs any of these other things on our list, fundamentals that we're working on almost first. I mean, without knowing the culture, and I mean, the climate survey is a survey. I mean, it could be done online. It doesn't have to be in person, but I almost think that that's like the first thing in this location where we are, and it will almost inform the work that you're probably going to lead at this institution. So I'm hoping that another gift is something. I'm hoping that is something that you're thinking about doing. And like Lisa said, it didn't have much traction. And I don't know if the interest wasn't there. I don't think COVID is a good excuse. I mean, it's a survey, right? When we're on our phone and we get 1,000 surveys a day, it's a survey. Whether you're sick with COVID, I've been impacted by it this week. I know Lisa has been. A lot of people I know have been impacted this week, but still, it doesn't stop me from playing on this little device right here in front of me, and punching buttons and answering a survey. But I just really think that that is almost first and foremost to guide any of these strategies or work that we are working on. So I'm hoping that that's part of your one of your on your list.
Thank you for that
Thank you.
input, Trustee Johnson. And then, of course, it would, no single one of you can direct the president, as you well know, but it's a gift. So thank you. Steve.
Very briefly, it is a retreat, and one of the things that we're here to do is to learn from each other and grow. And I just want to appreciate a handful of things that Rosie has said. I have, during this retreat, brought up a few very specific problems that I see that we need to work on. And I think at least twice, if not 3 times, Rosie has suggested a productive and inclusive path forward. And I'm very appreciative of that. And I wished I could have framed it that way, but but at least somebody within our board is able to sort of to do that for us. So thank you, Rosie. I appreciate the focus on what can we do to make it better in an inclusive way. Thank you.
Awesome. And I'm hoping we'll have a minute at the end for a kind of a wrap up. But I want to hover a moment. Ask if Dr. Bulger, have you gotten enough feedback on this item?
I have.
And I want to ask all of you collectively 2 questions as it pertains to these priorities that it sounds like you're validating. So the first is, do you validate these? Are you good with these top 3 priorities that your president is bringing forward? The question before you is, what are your expectations for your CEO as you begin this year? As she begins this, it doesn't mean that it can't be expanded, changed, revised throughout the year, but are we good with these 3 moving forward? Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I just really appreciate that they are concise, and there's 3 of them. I think that makes it, in the SMART goals construct, achievable. And so, no, and I think that there's a lot of different areas that we can undertake in those. Of course, I can blurt out several different things that would be goals that I would like to see, but at the same time, though, I feel like they can be addressed in these 3 items. So I just wanted to really acknowledge that and appreciate that. And I feel that as we move forward in this year, we'll have these 3 concepts in the back of our head. And I look forward to working with the president, the administration, and the board on this.
And the question I'm going to ask you in a moment is, what kind of feedback are you going to be wanting? How are you, what do you want for progress in that sort of sense? How will you assess her success in moving these priorities forward? So we'll be thinking of that. Rosie and then Mike.
So addressing that specific question, I cannot imagine identifying in the next 15 minutes how we would measure, or how we would say. My expectation is that perhaps by September, the president can give us some idea of the strategies she intends to pursue, so that then I know what questions to ask going forward about how we're doing, making progress in those 3 priority areas. I would want to be able to dialogue with the president perhaps no later than September or October. This is what you've said to us. This is what you've said you're going to try to do on the ground to move the ball down the court. So I want to be able to hear on some regular basis, not every single month, but some logical regular basis, about how it's going.
Mhm.
And particularly if you think it's not going and it's already time to recalibrate. So my expectation today is to learn in the relatively near future, perhaps by fall. Okay, so what does that mean? If these are the 3 priorities, what are the specific things you propose to do? And therefore, if that's what you're saying, then that's what we're going to base evaluating your success on.
And I have to thank you so much, Rosie. And I'm having to start being rude just because of time, and I hate this. But we have a truncated day. We needed 2 days to do this, you guys. I was upset when we only had 1 day, and then we get 4 hours. It's nut buckets. So it can only be a beginning. And I have to say to you, Rosie, the thing I've said to everyone else, it is not, although, you know, you're serving in the role as chair, so your voice is preeminent, but it has to be a collective expectation. Your expectations have to be everyone else has to want the same thing you're wanting for this to work well. That's all I'm trying to say. And you know that. I'm just stating the obvious. Thank you, Austin. Oh,
Are you talking about measurables at this point?
I agree with Rosie that measurable is going to be really hard, but so it's almost like, but you know, whatever you want to say about that.
Totally. Yeah. I guess like especially in regards to the fiscal side of things and transparency and so forth, being updated and reported on like what grants we're applying for, the purpose behind those grants. And as we get into the legislative session, different priorities that we might want to just keep an eye out on. And also just the condition that we're going into as we're going into the legislative session. Those are really big measurables, I think, that are give us an idea of what actions we need to do now and in the future. And as far as like institutional culture and so forth, a measurable that I would like to see, especially, let's see. I want to use the word explore as opposed to pursue. Partnership opportunities and consortiums in this time period, and how that could be beneficial for us, both on the financial side, cost sharing, but on the institutional side, creating a culture of higher education and workforce development attainment. Those are yeah. So I'm saying the word explore as a measurable as opposed to pursue, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Austin. And so I have to put this in the same bucket. What I said to Holly, what I said to Rosie, I have to say to you again as well. Unless she can't have 7 people giving her orders and expectations for even outcomes and what to pursue and what. So you must all come together and collectively say, yeah, what he said sounds good. Or you're going to drive her bonkers. And
totally understand.
It won't work well. So these are great. We're going to put them all in the bucket is what I'm assuming. And then when she brings, I'm speaking ahead, Stephanie, I'm going to let you say it, probably coming back in September with, out of all of this, here's what I'm looking at. Here's what I think would be good measures of my progress. And that's qualitative and quantitative. You know, some of what you're describing perfectly, Austin, are qualitative indicators. And then you calibrate in September on what that's going to, the plan and the assessment of it going forward. Am I saying that in a clear enough fashion for everybody? Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. This is like lightning round speed dating or something. Steve.
Well, in that spirit, I appreciate what you said, Cindy. I completely agree. I just want to underscore really what I heard Rosie say is that I think broadly you've got support for those 3 items, and and so my expectation next, to underscore what Rosie said, is some specifics that you would bring back to us that we can then track and measure, et cetera, going forward. So and then to follow up on that, I wanted to, well, at least put the idea out there for fellow board members to respond to as you consider those specifics. You may discover misalignment in the in the budget relative to those things. Like, oh, well, if we're going to focus on enrollment, I'm just making up that, for instance, we need to hire, whatever, an additional staff in there. I am open to that. I don't know what my fellow board members, how they feel about that. They certainly want to hear that. But if moving forward on those 3 items requires additional budgetary resources in the short term, I'm not promising, and of course I'm only one member, but I certainly want to hear, because I want you to have the resources you think that you need in order to succeed, as opposed to exclusively those that are lying around, which may not be which may not be adequate. So there was that. And then the other thing for me is that, you have a bit of a leadership vacuum. A lot of folks left in the last handful of months prior to your arrival. So one thing that I assume that you'll be thinking about, but I do want to hear about it, is how these significant, important positions you fill help you move forward on those 3 things. I assume you're going to be thinking about that as you make those hires, but I'd like to be informed.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else?
All the time.
Yeah, anyone else have anything else you want Dr. Bulger to consider as she's putting together a plan that she'll bring back to you in terms of what she'll be doing and how she might propose assessing her progress? And this isn't the last conversation, of course. Mike?
I'd just like to say that you have accurately, correctly synthesized priorities that the board has been sort of kicking around for a long time as you've watched board meetings and talked with us individually. So I appreciate that work that you've done. I also appreciate the fact that you've said 3 very broad things, recognizing that there's lots of infill that you're going to have to do as you work with your staff, and that I want to support that.
Stephanie, anything you want to say or clarify in terms of, this is about, got some calibration on your goals and expectations, and then your thoughts about what you'll be bringing back and when?
So I am fully committed to bringing a list of the specific strategies, and specifically how we are going to address each of those areas. I'm committed to doing that in September. And so I'm committed to doing that and then suggesting how to measure them. And that will be a draft document for the board to react to. And what I hope will come out of that is what was just mentioned, which is that the board would all agree on what specific measurements I will be using for my evaluation. And so that will be very, very helpful. And what I will be doing is taking that information and then giving the board itself regular updates on what is actually happening, so that at the end of the year, when it comes to evaluating me, then you'll have a long list of reports that you can draw from, so that it will not need to be based on your memory or your notes. So that's my intention. And so thank you for the support, all of your support. And also thank you for giving me the latitude and giving the leaderships of the institution really a lot of support. It's going to be huge for them. So thank you very, very much.
And I think, thank you, Stephanie. And Angela, you had a comment. You have a comment.
I do, thank you. Stephanie, I don't think that we can guarantee you that we'll all agree. But I think we can guarantee you that after the decision is made, we'll all support it.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love you, Angela. She always grounds us. The realism. The realism. We moved a little bit in this last segue of the conversation about mutual expectations. And, there was a part, you were implying, Stephanie, that you were going to be transparent and bringing this forward. The board members were saying, we have an expectation of, we want to hear back from you on a regular basis. Are there other mutual expectations that we should articulate in this moment. And then I want to talk about what we're going to do to provide the success for your new president. But first, what do you expect in terms of communication? What do you expect from both sides? What do you expect when people come to you with stuff?
Well, regular check-ins, I thought we were going to do.
Okay. Say more, Holly. Say more about what you mean there.
Well, I think that the president has made a concerted effort to meet with us individually on her own time, and has, I believe, a plan in place to continue meeting with us and being open and, keeping the lines of communication open as much as possible individually and as a board.
Awesome. So those one-on-one touch bases are important. Everybody else feel the same way on that? We're good? Yes. Angela, then Lisa.
I think that Marge may have arguably over communicated in email about things that are going on, and I really appreciate that. I think in terms of communication, over is better than under. If you're concerned you're erring on one side, in my opinion. And the other thing I would say is that I'm personally a fan of, in email, getting the last line first. If it shows up in my preview screen, so I know that I have an action that I need to take, that's really helpful for me. One person.
In the subject matter, if there's something you need.
You need an action, it's helpful for me to see that very early in the email. Otherwise, sometimes it gets buried in the paragraph or something like this. That's my personal preference for communication via email at work, but of course that's a different life. So one person's opinion.
Thank you. Others like that action item up front idea. I would think everyone would appreciate it. Awesome. Lisa?
Yeah, I'm hoping we can continue to have these types of conversations as a board with the president, and in terms of, the culture that we have as a board, around building trust, transparency and decision making, many of the same things that we're discussing for the institution, as Mike said earlier, being a model. And so in line with that, I just want to appreciate you, Cindy, for what we've been able to accomplish today. And I feel like it was exactly the right place to focus for where we need to be. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue this work together as a board, potentially even with you, because it feels like it's been a very productive day. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Steve?
Yep, responding to the mutual expectations question. It's a good question. I want to just say, Stephanie, that you have such a difficult job because I would say primarily because you have 7 bosses. Right. And Cindy's already alluded to this, right? It's really, rarely do we speak as one, right? When we're offering ideas and opinions, there's lots and lots of different kinds of stuff. And so Cindy, we don't have the benefit of Cindy's facilitation on a regular basis to remind us and you and et cetera, like, hey folks, just because Steve said it doesn't mean that's what Stephanie should do. Everybody's, we got to get some agreement, et cetera. That is a very useful thing for us to be reminded of, but we, whatever, it often doesn't happen. Anyway, so with regard to that, where I have seen executives run into trouble, sometimes just by reading it in the paper, not always through personal, experience, is when they're trying to please everybody or please a certain power center that they see within the board, right? So it's on us significantly to do what Cindy just did for us, is to remind ourselves, well, all right, Steve just expressed a strong opinion, but but whatever, there's 2 or 3 other people who completely disagree. And at the end of the day, we have a process in place for managing those things. It's majority rule, right? And I have been on the losing end of those things frequently. I don't have any problem with that. I really don't. Like, okay, I lost this one. And therefore therefore Stephanie's been given direction, sometimes with a 4-3, or which is unfortunate, but happens, or a 5-2 or whatever. And she's been given direction to do X. And I'm one of the 2, who voted against it, or one of the 3. I expect you to do what the majority says, and I will support it entirely. So you have that from me, and I hope you have that from the others. But I just think it's really important for us as a group to remember that is the process at the end of the day. And so we have all these discussions to try and persuade each other. And then when it's not clear, what it is that we want, I think this is where the expectation comes in. It's incumbent really on you to say, all right, folks, I'm hearing a lot of different perspectives here. I can't please you all. I can't do all things and go in multiple directions. We're going to need to take a vote and then respect the majority. And that's a hard thing to ask of you, but I will support it to the end, whether I'm on the winning or losing side.
I really appreciate that. That helps a lot. In fact, we have an ACCT complimentary retreat that I've been sending you an email about or 2. And so that would be really helpful to have some agreement on that. So, but thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I wonder if this is a time when I can kind of check in on the over communication that the board is expecting, what that actually means. Does that mean I'm not talking about crises, emergencies, because it's clear that I would be communicating with you if something like that happened. But I'm just talking about regular communication, about highlights of what's going on, so that the board can celebrate it and be supportive in that way. What is meant by over communication? Rosie, I think, wanted to jump in.
Well, I think we've benefited from somebody earlier pointed this out. Maybe it was you, Holly, who pointed out that Marge did a good job of when there was sort of information coming into the board from sources other than the college administration, we're at a loss to know, is this accurate? What is this? Same thing with comments that are made by people who testify at board meetings. Although we have a policy that we don't respond in the meeting, probably approved by some earlier board long before my service, of realizing that, there's no way to specifically respond to new information that you've never heard of before. It's really better to refer those items to administration and let administration vet them, as Steve likes to say, or bring back information, but at least to put information in context or in perspective. I think we've benefited a lot over the last few years of the kind of communication we got from ours. It was largely email in format. I don't need tons of presentations at board meetings about things that I could read about in an email memo or a written report. I also would like to say that it's my expectation personally that all board members have read the packet and have read the materials before they get to the meeting. So having people stand up and read a PowerPoint report to me or some kind of board communication, I find myself getting irritated about things like that. To me, the meeting is a time for dialogue about it, for you to get, reactions from board members to what they've read, or some discussion about an issue that may be controversial or contentious or something. I just don't need people to come to board meetings and read things to me that I've already read. So that's a little of my reaction.
Thank you, Rosie. Are we ready, Stephanie, to go on to Austin?
Yes, we are.
I will agree that the way Marge communicated different things, successes, and of course the emergencies and so forth, but also just opportunities for like events or opportunities for the board to attend and be a part of the community, be out in the community, and so forth. And these events can vary, of course. There's going to be certain things that are obvious, like foundation events and so forth. But there's also other opportunities, like we're going to be holding a job fair on campus. Feel free to stop by and see the environment of the job fair that's happening on campus and stuff. So and the reason is because there's certain things we can learn from a board packet, from a presentation and so forth. But once we're actually out in the community, seeing how the economy is functioning, how the community is functioning, how different aspects of the community are, that's important too. So yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Lisa?
Yeah, so I think Marge did a good job communicating successes that were relevant to the board. Critical issues that the board needed to be aware of, particularly so we don't get blindsided. But I also don't think it is the president's responsibility to update us on every little single detail. I don't think Marge did that. And I do think board members have other ways to inform themselves about what is happening at the college. I personally get, all of the lane messages and all of the information that goes to every employee. So I read through that. And so, I don't feel like Marge reported every single little thing, but she chose what were accomplishments, important successes, and the majority of the time it was informational. And because I think we need to be cautious of being deliberative by email. Decision-making needs to be public and transparent. And that is part of the law governing us as a board in this state.
Thank you, Lisa. Angela?
I think another area that I was thinking of is, sometimes Marge would receive a lot of communication from community members about something, some topic folks would be excited about. And so she'd shoot us an email and be like, here's what I'm hearing, here's what we've been talking about, here's the direction. And that's really helpful, just that, she's got a finger on the pulse. And so she's letting us know like what's going on. If you hear this rumor, here's what's happening. So I think that's mostly what I was referring to sort of vaguely by saying over communication.
I saw a lot of head nodding and thumbs up to that comment as well, Angela. Lisa, you had another? Or was your hand still up from something else? Okay, gotcha. Stephanie, I want to give you the chance to state any expectations you might need to be successful.
Well, one is I just think it would be very, very supportive, not to say that the board does not do this currently, but it'd be very supportive is if you are communicating with anyone in the institution, then to please copy me by email. Copy me or just let me know that you had a conversation with a person about something, and that would just be helpful for me to keep me in the loop on that. And I would certainly love to have these conversations with the board members, as we mentioned earlier, ongoing every month. I would certainly like to be able to talk with you about anything that may be coming up with respect to the board agenda or in the institution. And I'd like to be able to get your support with introducing me to members of the community where you are friends or colleagues with individuals in the community. And so I will be reaching out to you to ask you if you know some people. If you don't, that's no worries. But if you do know individuals, that would be really, really helpful. I think it would be much more clear once the strategies are in place and you have a chance to see them, that you'll have a sense of who else I should be introduced to or some member of the team to be introduced to. So that's really what's on my list right now. Thank you.
In these conversations, we almost always have someone talks about the no surprises from both sides. Those are some of the classic best practices that you always hear. Steve.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say no surprises. So thanks for getting that in there. I also just wanted to caution you, Stephanie, a little bit. 7 meetings, one-on-one meetings a month times 12, and that adds up to a lot. And then it does complicate things, I think, for you, because inevitably you sit down with somebody for an hour over a cup of coffee, you know, they express an opinion, and now it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with that exactly? Because how do you bring it back to the full group and make sure that it's something that's actionable and da. So I do think there's a lot of value, especially in the beginning of your tenure, to be meeting with folks, to get to know them personally, to build trust. There might be a little less value in that, 6, 8, 10 months from now. So I just wanted to, put a bookmark out there that, that makes it that much less awkward for you to, reduce the number of those things some period of time out, because it can make your job more difficult. It takes a fair amount of time just to deal with all the 7 of us. And it takes a little, and then what do you do if one of us asks for something, which we inevitably will, we're people. So I would have no problem whatsoever if 6 months from now you said, I think I got it. We're going to reduce this to once a quarter, or something like that. I think that's reasonable, but it won't be easy for you to say so. So I'm putting that out there on your behalf.
Yes, you're absolutely right. My intention right now is to do that as a practice, as a habit, and to keep in touch with everyone. Everything's moving so quickly. The external environment's moving so quickly. The internal environment is moving so quickly. So I just see that there may be a need for me to do that. I'll spend the time to do that. And it may, with you individually or in twos, as the law allows. So yes, I would love to be able to do that.
All right. The only really, really big thing that we didn't talk about explicitly, but I think there was some implicit discussion, and I'm going to suggest you put it atop of a next priority discussion, is what Rosie brought up earlier about what are you going to do collectively to support your CEO's success? I think it's implicit in a lot of what we just described about giving clear expectations and about, your expectations for the relations and communication. That's certainly going to lend to success. But a piece in this for you to noodle on and maybe go deeper on is, to what degree, for example, will you tolerate her risk-taking or even failure in certain arenas? And, what does short-term, I love, Austin, I think you're the one that introduced it early on, short-term, long-term. And that I would posit should be a template for all of these discussions. What are we doing in the near term? What are we doing long-term to support the CEO's success, to advance the strategic agenda, to analyze how well things are going? So I put that at the top of a next discussion, however you do this, Rosie, whether it's going to be another retreat format or you can get it. The other key topics that we didn't get to that would have been on the longer agenda are the establishing the board goals. And I know I had the chance to say this to Rosie and Lisa and Stephanie when we were doing preliminary discussions. I'll drop this as a consideration for you. I think sometimes boards get lost because they conflate 2 different kinds of board goals. And in fact, you have 3. You have one that you dealt with today, which are your board expectations for your CEO. Those are goals of a sort. So that kind of board expectations. But in terms of board goals that I might suggest you consider on an annual basis are your board goals, big strategic priorities, I'd probably rather call them, for the institution. And you revisit them annually. And that can come up under the aegis of your strat plan if you're comfortable. This is where you calibrate and go, have we got our big picture goals right? Are they still working? And then you can collect all this information. There's, reports that come along, how far the strategic plan is working, blah, blah, blah. But there's another set of goals that I don't think I've heard you talk about. And that is a collective set of goals for you as a board. And those can be simple. They can be few, but it's how will we work together? What are we going to do this year, this next 6 months, this whatever time period, to be a better board, to learn more collectively, to be more cohesive, to be the high-performing board that Lane needs to meet this ideal strategic priority agenda that we've set for the institution. So I throw that for you to noodle on, think about. And finally, maintaining strategic momentum. Back to the very first conversation about intentionality. And I think that was certainly a theme through the Levine and Van Pelt book that you wrestled with so well early on. I think that you did such a great job of using that to frame your discussions today. But the intentionality of sustaining momentum. I am so excited for you. I'm excited for Lane. You're a fabulous board. And I'm not just blowing smoke. You are. You have work to do. I think some of this piece of 7 different ideas, maybe Steve, you were saying, 7 different masters, if we're not careful, differing opinions about things like the fiscal health of the institution. That's the richness of the diversity that you bring. That's part of your gift. That's part of what makes you great. The fact that the way you work together, though, is commendable. And I really think you need to take that and own it and play to your strengths in that regard. So I'm excited. Thank you for this great work today. Dr. Bulger, this is yours. You should have the amen.
Amen. No, it's really, really great. It really is a fantastic board of different perspectives and different life experiences in a lot of ways. And that just makes the institution richer and makes my experience with you and with the institution much more rich. So I just really appreciate all of you and appreciate this opportunity to have had a chance to be with the fantastic Dr. Cindy Miles. So that's been really wonderful this morning. And I know we have much more work to do, but I'm ready. And I hope that I've communicated that to you, that I'm ready. We're all ready to go. We've got a fantastic team. Thank you so much for supporting my team. I'm so grateful for that. And I would say supporting the leadership broadly. So the faculty leadership, the classified professionals leadership as well. Thank you for supporting everyone in the institution. It means so much to them. So that's all I would have, and have a great weekend.
So it's my job to sort of bring this to a close. And before any of you leave, let me thank, on behalf of my colleagues on the board, thank you, Dr. Cindy Miles, for your work with us today. You really did help us, I think, accomplish a great deal this morning. Thank you, Dr. Bulger, for your efforts to put some meat on the bones to start with. You've given us a lot to think about. We're looking forward to September. My commitment to my colleagues on the board is I have been taking copious notes. I anticipate debriefing with Dr. Bulger and Dr. Miles, and I intend to forward to you a report of some of the things I heard that board members would like to talk about going forward, would like to structure some time to talk about going forward. And then at some point in the future, we can talk about what's the best format to do that in. Work sessions, a January retreat, whatever it might be. So I want to thank all of you for making time today. I'm so grateful we were all here. So sad that we couldn't be in person and have the entire day and do some of the relationship stuff that we still haven't had the opportunity to truly do as a group, but we'll get there. So thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Yeah.
Okay.